aika monta leikkiä.
Colleagues and friends, great to see you all here. We are very happy to see the familiar faces here, but also extremely happy to see so many new experts. I'm Tina Annu from the Ministry of Interior, so we are running this seminar together with our colleagues from CMC Finland, and they are here.
Hello, good morning or good day. On my behalf, my name is Järjesti. I work currently as the Head of Human Resources and Mission Support Unit in the Crisis Management Center Finland in Kuopio. Glad to welcome you all here, and I do see a lot of familiar faces, but also, as Tina mentioned, glad to see some faces that I don't recognize so far, so it's always good to have a fresh, let's say, expertise in this event.
And I'm Eva Tuomi, Human Resources Officer at CMC.
Thank you. Currently we have around 113 experts in the civilian crisis management posts abroad. Roughly 1/3 of them work in the EU positions, 1/3 of them in the OSCE positions, and 1/3 in the UN positions. And our Minister for Foreign Affairs has set a limit of minimum of 20 experts in the OSCE and 20 experts in the UN. So you have very good career prospects to go. The normal path is to apply to the CMC core course. And as we would like to keep this occasion very interactive and relaxed, I'd like to ask those who have been in the core course raise their hands so we could see. Okay, thank you so much. Those of you who would be interested in applying to the core course, so some more hands, excellent. This is actually the core aim of this seminar, that we could help you and support you to succeed in the recruitment process. In the OSCE and UN, there is a competence-based recruitment process which is not always very easy. So we would like to, we know that many of you have excellent expertise and very strong background. We would like to help you to guide you through this and give you some more help. We have here two colleagues from the OSCE Human Resources, Marta and Gustavo. Could you please maybe introduce yourself a bit more?
So, thank you for having me here today. My name is Marta Fernandez de Mazarabrot. I know it's a bit complicated. I'm a recruitment officer and I work for the OSCE since 5 years in the recruitment unit.
Moi. My name is Gustavo Araújo, and Moi is the only thing I know in Finnish, so forgive me. I'm the Chief of Recruitment at the OSCE, and I've been at the organization for 6 months. So it's a pleasure being back in Finland again. It's my second time, and there will be many more, I'm sure.
Thank you, Gustavo and Marta. Please, the floor is yours. So we have 1 hour now with them, and then we continue.
So again, good afternoon, everyone. And Marta and I are delighted to be here to talk to you because I think it's very, very important that we cooperate and collaborate with Ministry of Foreign Affairs and everyone that supports the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. As many of you know, secondment is an essential component of how the OSCE activities take place across the 57 participating states. So we are very appreciative of the support of the Finnish government in actually getting secondees potentially like you, and also to make sure that we enhance the ability of potential applicants like you to put your best foot forward in putting in applications for us. One thing that's of note as well, international organizations are international organizations. Regardless of mandate, we have very similar recruitment processes. That's not to say that you should target your applications and target your interviews depending on the mandate of the organization. But that is to say that when you put in an application for an organization, there's a certain structure in way to operate that you can follow. I particularly don't like formulas, But what we're going to tell you today is a lot of little tips on how to make sure that you can have your professionalism, your experience, and your skills shine as much as possible so that you can get noticed. Okay? I know we don't have much time for this first session. We have about 45 to 50 minutes. And the first time we're going to focus on the preparing job application for the OSCE. This afternoon we're going to have about 2 hours, and we're going to focus on preparing for competency-based interviews. By show of hands, how many people here have participated in competency-based interviews? Raise your hand, please. Good. Some of you who haven't probably may have and you don't remember, or you don't know what they're like. After today, I hope that you feel a lot more confident, if not aware of what it's like to go through this process. All right?
Also, we want to say that we are the ones probably doing most of the talking, but this is supposed to be very interactive. Please interrupt us, ask questions whenever you feel like, or at the end. We're going to make you work, we're going to make you talk too, especially afterwards. And we're going to walk you through the whole recruitment process, because a recruitment starts from the moment when your eye catches, so to say, a vacancy notice that you have found in an international organization such as the OSCE, and you think, oh, I could do that job. So it starts there, and that's what we're going to start with, preparing the job applications.
One of our goals at the OSCE as well is make sure that we get you to work a little bit. So if you have pen and paper, or a notebook or an iPad in front of you to take notes, and we may run some exercises depending on time. If not in this first session, definitely the follow-up session as well. So moving on, as we already introduced ourselves, as Marta said, she's been...
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so yeah, thank you. Yes. I'm Chief of Recruitment, and I work directly with Marta, who has a lot of experience in the OSCE, recruiting for field operations of executive structures in the Secretariat as well. So, do you want to do the agenda?
Sure. Well, we need to walk you through this pretty quickly because of the time. We're going to focus on those areas where you can actually, get some tips and learn some tricks and get the most important information out of what you should do if you're applying. We're going to first of all see the planning when you're planning for the application and understanding the job description or the vacancy notice, as you will see it in the OSCE. Also, we're going to describe achievement and responsibilities. What is it that you're supposed to fill in there? We're going to talk about the recruiter's corner, so what recruiters actually recommend candidates or potential candidates who are going to apply. And also on the cover letter, because it's much more important than you actually can think. And of course, Q's and A's, not at the end, whenever you feel like it, okay?
Very good. Before I cover over here, one question that I have for all of you guys is how many of you have a LinkedIn profile? Raise your hands. Very good. One thing that you're going to do today, before the end of this presentation, is to add read Marta to your network and follow OSCE.org. That's very important. Why? Because the OSCE recruitment unit is creating content that's targeted and relevant for potential applicants like you. Not just for the OSCE, but information that's relevant for any other international organization. We do have a talent acquisition monthly newsletter that covers different topics. The newsletter this month focuses on preparing for competency-based interviews, which is a nice coincidence. Previous newsletters also covered preparing a job application, understanding the secondment process at the OSCE, and monitoring officer opportunities at the OSCE. So every month you can receive some information about best practices from private sector, not-for-profit, and governmental sector as well, on how to prepare different types of applications, obviously with a focus on the OSCE, okay? One thing that's very important when it comes to the application, me as a recruiter, I've been a recruiter in the private sector. I used to work at PricewaterhouseCoopers in New York City, then I moved on to the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna, then I moved to UNDP in New York, then I moved back to Vienna again. And I'm not talking about this audience specifically, but one thing that's very important for you to think about as a potential applicant. There are a lot of us. International organization positions are very competitive. Applying for the sake of applying is a trick that does not stick. So you have to be very planful in your applications. One thing that I say first is research before applying. Be very conscientious about the positions that you apply for. First question I would ask yourself is, what are the main tasks and projects of the work unit? Meaning, for yourself even, would you be happy conducting those tasks? Is this something that's aligned with your career path? Because if it's not, it can be clearly seen by interviewers and board members. Number two, is this the work area for you? Sometimes we get individuals who are applying for a P3 or a P5 in the same month. I remember one time that when I was at another UN agency, that I clearly remember an English teacher applying for Director of Technical Cooperation in Africa. I felt like calling her and saying, what are you doing? Because you're wasting my time, you're wasting your time, and you're wasting the recruiter's time. And application takes time on your side and our side as well. So you want to maximize your ability to actually put yourself in a competition. It's not just competing, it's competing smart. Next question is, do you have the relevant skills and experiences? And we're going to be talking a lot about what it means to have those relevant skills and experiences versus meeting the minimum requirements. That's very important. Next thing would you enjoy the tasks associated to the position besides getting yourself in that career path and thinking long-term about that job? I just got my job at the OSC and I have no problem telling. I'm already thinking about my next job and my 2 jobs after that. And I want to make sure that in this job as Chief of Recruitment at the OSC, that I am getting the experience that will put me on my path. Because it's both ways.
Maybe to add that many international organizations, such as the OSCE, are called non-career organizations. Yes, of course you have a career. Of course you have a career, because you can stay 7 to 10 years in the OSCE. But still, you need to think of the same, of the next step, because you cannot stay there forever unless you're going to do an administrative position. So all the officer positions, director positions, advisors, chiefs, can stay for a max of 10 years, changing.
Great.
Yeah.
The next question is, does your profile match the job minimum requirements? And if so, is this enough for you to be contacted for the next steps? And last but not least, realistically, assess the job market for your area of expertise. What do you think that I mean by that? Can both maybe volunteer to give me an answer to that? I've been a teacher, so if you don't volunteer, I may volunteer for you. What do you think I mean by that? Realistically assess the job market for your area of expertise.
Well, I think you always have to consider if your expertise is in high demand in that situation in the current world. So it really depends, and the situation may change quite drastically.
Thank you very much. That's exactly right. If I am a human resources person, how many more of me are there out there? If I am competing for a job, maybe at the OSCE or at the United Nations, and I'm looking at a job, let's say, in a headquarters in New York, am I competing with 70 people, or am I competing with 1,200 people or more? And is meeting the minimum requirements enough for me to feel justified in getting despondent, angry, depressed, or upset about not moving forward in the process? Because in the end, it's not personal, right? One thing that I say, including to my team members and to myself, international organizations have no responsibility or obligation to hire any of us. It is a privilege to work in the international civil service, just as it is a privilege to work at the organizations that you work for, or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or Ministry of Interiors. It's not an entitlement. Okay? Marta.
So as you might be familiar with, we work in competencies, and competencies are not only explored at the interview level, but from the very, very, very beginning of the strategic level, when a department is looking for, is looking into hiring a new person. And in general, the organization, the mandate, our commitments, we need to think of a series of competencies that we want to see in every single staff and mission member in our organization. So I think it was 2014-15, we came up with these core competencies on, as you can see, we have communication, collaboration, analysis, decision-making, planning, initiative-taking, flexibility, core values as well, and managerial competencies, which you will definitely see in interview questions explored if you get to the stage of the interview. Not only these, because every single position has then specific ones, but these are the ones this organization expects from every one of us at a high level.
Okay, good. Your job as well is to look through the job description and try and dissect the job description to infer which competencies are most needed. In a lot of job descriptions, be it UN or OSCE or Interpol or World Bank, you may see the competencies broken down there. But it's by looking at the tasks and responsibilities that you're really going to dig through and think,
Well,
I guess the next question about that.
Yeah.
So this is one of the competencies that we have in the OSCE. Initiative taking proposes and initiates new ideas, activities, and projects. Both Marta and I are psychologists by training. And one concept in psychology that we have is the ability to operationalize behavior, right? What you see here is initiative taking operationalized. And there are positive indicators and negative indicators. What we do in an interview is try and dissect from you via real life examples whether the indicators that you are providing are positive or negative. And if they are negative, have you learned from the lesson? And are you able to move on without repeating the same mistakes? Or do less of mistakes? So far so good?
And I would also add, Gustavo, that in a recruitment process for the OSCE, but also UN or any other international organization, we are going to explore these in detail. You need to have examples for these. We will work on this later, of course. But we will also explore the knowledge that you have, the technical knowledge that you have in this specific position, for example. We will also see if you have the relevant education. It's not only competencies, but probably these are the most difficult and the most challenging to practice and prepare and demonstrate in an interview when you're nervous and you think in general things I have done in the past, but you don't think of a specific example. So we're going to help you out with this one too.
So as you can take a look here, you see those behavioral indicators for taking initiative. So effective initiative-taking behaviors, number one, anticipates emerging needs and proposes solutions to address them.
Practically applies creative thinking to own work.
Conceptualizes new ideas that add value to the organization.
And or demonstrate commitment to achieving or surpassing results. These are just examples.
So as you go through the job description and you dissect the competencies that may be needed, either because they are spelled out literally there, and because you went through the tasks and responsibilities of the position to infer what are the main competencies needed, you also have to think to yourself, if I am asked a question to provide real-life examples of initiative taking, what are my examples? Why are they relevant to the job in question? How recent are they? How do I emphasize my own role? How do I mention that I supported the team? How do I add value to the organization?
Yeah, so as we were mentioning yesterday, it's not only competencies, which are very, very important, but also your education. And we have requirements for this one too. A legal officer cannot not have a legal master or bachelor's degree. You cannot be a doctor, a medical doctor, and nothing else, and then apply to a legal officer position because you're probably not going to get very far. So this is really, really relevant. Although for the OSCE and for the other international organizations, when we actually ask for the end-to-end education, we give a series of subjects or topics you can actually have studied. Yeah, so it's not so specific. Some, for example, like legal officer is absolutely clear, but others, like a policy support officer, for example, you can have different educational backgrounds. The experience, of course, and there are specific years, minimum years that we actually require. We will see this too, and languages.
In one example regarding experience, let's say, and this is a personal example that I always volunteer because I find it relevant. Before getting into human resources, I used to be a clinical trials manager conducting pharmacological research. Does anybody here know what a clinical trials manager does? Sir?
Supervises experimenting with new drugs.
Perfect. Supervising experimenting with drugs. And what do you do exactly to experiment with drugs? You find?
Test bodies.
Yes, including patients. And what do you do with the patients? How do you find them? You have a protocol, right? And you identify the aspects of the protocol to target a certain patient category. Then you get the patients and you process them through multiple phases. You say goodbye to the patients that don't qualify. You say let's continue to the patients that qualify until you continue the study. Does this sound or not like recruitment? How do you think I moved from working at a hospital to going to PricewaterhouseCoopers in Human Resources? By aligning my previous experience exactly to the job description that I was looking for. Some people may say, hey, but that was easy in your case. Okay, I give you that. But I don't know any other clinical trials manager doing research, doing human resources right now. So apparently it may be easy, but not common. So your task is to think about your past experiences, compare them with the job that you're applying for, and see what is the alignment. How do I show the hiring manager that I have the skills to do it, but that I have transferable skills? So far so good? Here is a job description of an associate project officer, B2, which is, what is that, 3 years of experience, approximately?
4 years minimum, yeah.
Depends on the organization as well. It can be 3 years.
Yeah.
As you can look at that, this is the bread and butter of international organizations because it's a project management type of role. Okay? So that means the applications in most international organizations for something like this, at a place like the International Atomic Energy Agency where I used to work, upwards of 600, if not more. All right? If you look at the characteristics, at the requirements, you see first level university degree in international affairs, political sciences, sociology, psychology, international law, security studies, a closely related field. How many people meet just that first criteria? Raise your hand. Okay, I would say close to a third of you. A minimum of 4 years of relevant professional experience in international affairs. Anybody meets this here? Similar, kind of a third of you. Experience in multilateral affairs, project coordination and implementation. Close to a third of you. You see a pattern there? A lot of people may meet this criteria. Meaning that your job is to figure out how do I differentiate myself from everybody else who's also meeting the criteria in a pool of highly competent and highly diverse potential applicants. So this is just to give you an idea of what you could find. As I mentioned, a lot of folks may actually meet the criteria. If you click on Marta, your point is, how do I stand out? I'm going to give you some tips on the next. Okay. So, one thing to focus on is the fact that you can conceptualize this as a pyramid. At the bottom, you have qualifications and language skills. Then you move up the pyramid going through competencies and expertise. And then less and less people are actually meeting the criteria. Until you get to the point with duties and responsibilities. And that's how you funnel until you get to more or less and less individuals to be considered for the positions you've applied. That's why there are plenty of people who meet this who are not able to move to the top.
Definitely, and I would add that, I mean, I'm sure this is what is meant by duties and responsibilities. It's also mentioning in a job description your achievements.
Yes.
Through your duties and responsibilities, what you achieved, because that's what the recruiter is looking for.
The research says that recruiters sometimes have seconds. At the OSCE, believe me, I would love to have a lot less time to actually go through all the applications, but because of our commitment to participating stage to make sure that all applicants receive due diligence, we go through all of them in a very manual way. In the future, hopefully, with the new recruitment platform, it becomes slightly easier. But in private sector, for example, most recruiters take less than 30 seconds per application. So, a good tip for you guys is to think, if I am applying for a position, how do I make sure that the recruiter will look at the application, will compare that with the job description and go, okay, let me take more than 30 seconds on this person. There are obviously gender differences in applications. What I'd like you guys to do right now is to close your eyes. Everybody, please close your eyes. Now I'd like you to raise your hand whether or not you consider yourself a better than average driver. Raise your hand if you consider yourself a better than average driver. Now keep your hands up and look around. It's not possible that more than 50% are better than average. That's not average.
Regarding, we are the average.
Which means that people tend to overestimate their ability to have a certain type of competency. Men or women. Research indicates that men pretty much needs to achieve, or they believe that they have about 60% of the job description requirements and duties and activities to apply. Women typically wait until they have 80 or 100%. What I'm telling you is to get a little sense of self-awareness so that you can really investigate yourself. Am I doubting myself in this application process? Can I push it a little forward? Am I being too ambitious in applying for this? Do I really have the experience? Of course, these are generalities. We cannot just generalize everyone. There are plenty of women who will do the same as men do and vice versa, but this is food for thought. Because even in the application process, we have to make sure that we get a nice sample of diversity in geography and also in gender. One of the things that has helped the OSCE tremendously in the last few years is the fact that we have solo interviews. Have you ever heard or done a video pre-screening interview? Marta, could you tell us more about that?
Sure. Very quickly, because we are mindful of the time, but a couple of years ago we introduced this tool very briefly. It's a recruitment cycle in the OSCE. You apply to the OSCE to a position. We receive, if it's a seconded position, the delegation or the capital receives it. In any case, when we receive your application form, we screen it and we long list you if you meet the minimum requirements. Sometimes there are many people meeting the minimum requirements, and this goes to the hiring manager who's totally lost with, I don't know, for example, 50 candidates and doesn't know how to go from 50 to 4 that he needs to interview or she needs to interview or would like to interview. So in order to help the hiring managers with this process, we introduced this tool in between the long list and the short list so that managers can better assess the candidates they would like to see. And it gives these candidates the opportunity to, give a little bit more information about themselves in addition to the application form. So what the hiring manager does is, for example, out of 50, picks 10, 15 people and invites these people, we invite these people to a Sondru interview, which is pre-recorded. The candidate receives all the information via email, clicks on the website, of this application and then sees some questions that is asked. All the candidates get the same questions, and the candidate responds in a limited period of time while this person is being recorded. So once this is done, the hiring manager receives this information and can have, well, a little bit more information about these candidates and then draw the shortlist.
And this has helped us actually look at more participants, more potential applicants from non-represented and underrepresented participating states, more women, and more people who may be in between and on the fence. If you want to find out more about this, all you need to do is actually sign up to our newsletter, because we have a webinar, a 1-hour training with someone from the company that developed the software, teaching people how to best do this kind of thing, and I can provide you the information later. So again, going back to the associate project officer, you can skip after this one.
Sure.
The goal is make sure that you understand as well the duties and responsibilities. Look at the items that I highlighted in yellow. What is the commonality among all of those items? What are all of them? Go ahead.
Activities.
They are activities described as action verbs. Overseeing, coordinating, and ensuring coherence in the implementation of activities. Identifying and liaising. Ensuring alignment and synergies.
Advising, collecting and compiling, monitoring, implementation of activities, hiring, preparing, contributing, and representing.
So your trick is to do the following. If you see the job description this way, what you need to do is to make sure that you describe your previous activities in a similar fashion. If you have indeed engaged in these activities. Because recruiters also have a good eye, and they can tell when people are kind of enabling things very quickly. And because of the number of applications we receive, it's very easy to put someone to the side if we're not really sure whether the person is truthful or not by the type of examples that they propose. Then, the next step is, beyond looking at the action verbs in the job description, is actually looking exactly what is done with those action verbs. So going back to overseeing, coordinating, and ensuring coherence in the implementation of live curricula, providing fundraising, budget formulation, and advisory support. So it's beyond doing. What is it that you're doing? Think about my example about clinical trials. When I went from patient recruitment to candidate recruitment, the essence was the same. What is the essence of the activities that you've engaged before or are engaging now related to the essence of the job that you're applying for? Other examples here. Monitoring implementation of activities, identifying any problems and taking corrective action, exercising responsibility over project budget. That's a hint right there. If you don't have project budget experience, what are the kinds of budget or finance experiences that you have that you can align to your application so that you get the attention of the recruiter?
Yeah, in addition, for example, what we were discussing before about communication and other competencies, here you see that you need to prepare financial reports, speeches and talking points and presentations. So surely there's going to be something in the minimum requirements about communication, and we are going to explore this in the interview, for sure. So you can be sure of that. Now you can start preparing. Shall I continue?
Yes. So you have 3 questions to ask yourself when you look at the duties and responsibility. Martha, what's the first question?
How can I show that I have directly relevant experience?
Meaning, how do I show the hiring manager that I'm already doing the job? Would I have experience that's very similar to the one that they're requiring? Second question?
How can I show that I hit the ground running? And
So-
this is important for us.
Go ahead, can you tell us?
This is very important for us because we have, at least in the OSCE, limited resources, limited staff, a huge commitment in everything that has to do with security in 3 dimensions. And we need people in principle who actually can adapt very quickly. And so if it's going to be somebody who has the potential but will take a year, it's going to be more difficult than if it's really somebody who will understand the process quickly and will adapt quickly to that environment, to that department, and to that job.
Especially since we are a no-career organization that needs to get the job done. And we have contracts that are limited duration, meaning that we need you to add value, we can help you add value. Okay, Marco said in principle, because here's the next question, which is, how do I show that I have potential transferable skills? Because it could be that you haven't engaged in the very same activities, but you've engaged in similar activities. And there is a great talent in looking at a job description, dissecting it, and being able to frame your current and past experiences in a way that the recruiter will like, the titles are different, but look at that. He or she has done 1, 2, and 3. Does that make sense?
This makes me think, Gustavo, that we didn't introduce the organization itself. We assume, maybe wrongly, that you guys all know what the OSCE is and what we do. Otherwise, if somebody's not familiar, we can definitely go to that too.
Just okay. You can leave it there. This is an exercise that I always like to engage in or talk to people about doing when they are preparing job applications. The team exercise. So the first thing you do is the following. Go ahead, Marta. You look at the needs of the organization. What does it mean? What the organization needs the person to do. I'm not talking necessarily about the minimum requirements. I'm talking about the duties and activities. I'm talking about how is the person going to add value to the organization on a daily basis. Then you look at your own experience. So if you really look at, to the side, needs of the organization. Would you do the first one?
Sure. Designing an outreach and partnership strategy and establishing partnerships.
So if you are someone who haven't necessarily done that, but you helped, you assisted, or you supported, your goal is actually to describe, look, supported an outreach campaign and assisted manager in liaising with potential partners, directly involved in development of key partnerships. This is someone who may be at a lower level trying to apply to the higher level position and showing that if you don't have the direct experience, you have parallel experience in going in that direction. The second one, Martha.
Preparing substantive and financial reports and liaising with donors as required.
If you have done that, great. Write it like that. If you haven't, and you have parallel experience, something in the lines of collecting information from diverse stakeholders to support in the creation of these reports. Because then you're showing the recruiter that you are on the path and you have relevant information.
And the last one will be representing and delivering presentations, informal and informal, for meetings, discussions inside and outside the organization as requested.
And if you have that, mention it. If you don't, and you have client-face type of activities, something in the lines of comfortable with presenting in front of audiences as currently possess client-facing position. So again, you are aligning your former or current duties with the job you're applying for, assuming that you are applying for the right job. You've got a question, Anne?
Yeah, just about that financial reports. I mean, if I was the recruiter and someone gave me that collected information from diverse stakeholders, but they didn't show that they had financial experience, I would say no.
That's fine.
But would that kind of would that be a no as well, or would you be able to?
So how do you clarify that in here? Collected information from diverse stakeholders to support in the creation of financial reports. Now you clarify. Now maybe the recruiter is going to inquire, maybe I should take a second look. I'm glad that this is there, because then we call it.
And also I would add, because sometimes, and you see this also in the background of the vacancy, you also see it in the responsibilities and the requirements. Sometimes you are looking for people with experience and potential
Yeah.
And this could be potential. It really depends on what the organization is looking for and and where you stand in your professional career, so to say. So it doesn't necessarily have to be alone.
Marta, this is about a few mistakes that people
some of the things. So we always see things when we are reading, as Gustavo says, we read every single application form manually. We have to go scroll through everything to assess whether a candidate is or not suitable. Other international organizations have a first filter which is done by a machine which identifies keywords that you have in the vacancy notice and you have actually used in your application form. Also important for you to know. We don't do that.
Sorry, and we are moving in that direction,
Yes.
not to try and impeach your ability to be shown, but to actually let you know that as you create an application, you use the keywords that are associated to the job, because that shows that you know. One example that I have is, with my experience in recruitment starting in the United States, they don't use the word recruitment, they use the word recruiting. You betcha that in my applications, I have recruiting and recruitment, because I never know who's looking.
Yeah.
You need to think about the equivalent for your types of positions. So someone has a question there?
Yeah, sorry again. I've heard that people start using these like keyword searches so that they put text in white, so that they add the text but that you can't actually see the text in the PDF, because then you would be able to add a lot of keywords for these machines.
I don't know about
No,
that.
I'm not familiar with that one.
There's one thing, there's no amount of tricks. There's one thing. If you are qualified for your position, your job is to make sure that you get noticed. If you're not qualified, you may play all the tricks that you want. You may even reach the interview level. You get in front of a recruiter who is experienced and a panel member who know what you're doing, you may get going forward.
Yeah.
Not under our shop.
So we look at every single application form and we pay attention. We're very sensitive, obviously, with things like, for example, typos. And I can tell you, I have gone through my own application forms 1,000 times, and I know what they're looking for, and I know how to, I've been in this business for a while. When I give it to somebody else, my husband, who is extremely detailed, he finds a comma missing, a typo there, because it's, so 4I principle, I definitely recommend. Cover letters or motivation letters, never leave them blank. This is the perfect opportunity to mention things you could not mention in the employment history. Also, take into consideration that at least OSCE application forms allow just a limited number of characters. When you save your profile, if you go back and you have put too much information, it will be cut and it looks horribly bad. And I didn't have the opportunity, so to say, to explain everything. So make sure when you save it in your profile that everything is there, and also make sure that the cover letter contains achievements. Do not repeat what you have said before. Achievements. Maybe something about motivation, very short. Maybe your vision, for your own professional career, things like this.
We have some examples. We only have 10 minutes. Is that okay if we move forward? So that we see some examples.
Yeah,
describing your achievements and duties. One thing that Marta said, focusing on positive results, focusing on your role, quantify if possible, and I'll provide you an example very soon. List awards if you received any, relevant skills, and the impact. Let's not forget, we are in organizations to add value. We're not there to clock in and clock out. It is the right and entitlement of any organization to pick the best person who will, in their discretion, do the best job to help you fulfill their mission.
And also, if you belong to networks, niches, associations, you have done publications, these kind of things, what they're telling us is in this very tiny, small, little world of countering cybercrime, for example, this person belongs to this network. Great, because then you know that, you belong there, you have done things for this network, you are in this area and you're interested. So this raises definitely our interest and our attention.
Similar as well, when it comes to describing achievement and duties. So what you put is a quick overview of positive results you have accomplished. Be clear about your role and contribution. What have you done to support the team? What was your role in supporting that team? If possible, quantify the achievement, and we'll give you an example very soon. mention related awards, and indicate how your achievement affected the team or organization. Sample number 1, Marta, could you read that for us?
Sure. Sample 1. Advised the National Minister on Social Policy on combating human trafficking matters and spearheaded the legislative package establishing safe centers for victims across the country and their entitlement to social and financial assistance.
This is a reel from someone who worked, if I'm not mistaken, OSCE, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Okay, look at that. Advised. Action verb. For you to advise someone means that you are an expert, meaning that you know what you're doing. So you pick the right verb there. Number 2, National Minister on Social Policy. You're telling them that you're dealing with high stakeholders or with individuals who have leverage in government on combating human trafficking matters. So it's not just human trafficking, but everything that's associated to human trafficking. And spearheaded the legislative package, meaning took the initiative and led. Advise, take initiative. I know what to say, I know what I'm doing. Establishing safe centers for victims across the country. Results. Let's look at another example.
Designed and delivered 30 outreach presentations online to an audience of more than 1,000 lawmakers from Southeastern Europe in 20 months. Topics focused on raising awareness of innovative policy solutions to support gender mainstreaming practices.
Look at that. Designed, meaning I know the content, I know how to create presentations, I know how to convey them, I know how to address stakeholders at their level. Delivered, I know how to create it, I know how to do it. 30 outreach presentations. Okay, in how long? In 20 months. Because it could be 35 years. It could be a lot, it could not. Give a time frame if you can. To an audience of 1,000 lawmakers. Oh, by the way, this position is actually in Southeastern Europe. Oh yeah, I did that in Southeastern Europe? That's what I'm going to write down. Because I want you to know. Because I want to get noticed. Topics focus on raising awareness of innovative policy solutions to support gender mainstreaming practices. Maybe this position has something regarding gender mainstreaming experiences needed or required. Point is, have you really done this? This is, again, aligning your former, current experience to the job you apply for.
Third sample, shall we go for it, or do we have time, or do we?
One more example and then we move forward.
Okay. Somebody had a question?
Yep.
Somebody had a question? No?
Yes, previous one is I find it too general. It should have something more specific. And how can you catch the point on that? What is it really about?
The previous example?
Yes,
This one.
example. Okay.
This one?
Something, yeah, that is one. Something that raises questions. That it is like a couple of more sentences.
Well, it just doesn't describe in which capacity it was done.
Well,
That's
design-
properly mentioned in the CV anyway.
Yeah, design and delivered is something that's saying what you've done, right? I designed and I delivered. The topics I mentioned there.
Doesn't matter if it's so general. I find it.
Okay.
Yeah, well, but because you need to consider that this is probably 1% of what you are going to mention in the application form.
And you're looking at one sentence.
Exactly, exactly.
When you look at the entirety of the application, maybe your perspective will be different, but that's a great point. I don't happen to think that this is general, but
Me neither. I do have my situation, task, action, and result, actually. I do have it, but I mean, yeah, maybe the impact of what, but yeah, could be. These are real cases, huh? So,
Let's go to the...
good to know. Go ahead. So, organized 3 large conferences on human rights in the past year, counting with the attendance of 2,300 participants, including high stakeholders from delegation.
So if you're applying for a conference planning type of position or associate project manager that's whose duty is to organize the conference for a lot of people, and you happen to have done that, you give me information of how many, the potential complexity, the topic, and the potential audience as well. Again, this could be seen as generic. I don't believe so, but if it is seen as generic in isolation, you're going to see more information in the job description and the cover letter to put the pieces together. Because in the end, what you're doing is gathering multiple pieces of information to make a decision.
And again, it's true that you could here add the impact, definitely. It's just an excerpt of an application form. If you add here the impact this had, then you're making it even more complete. It's definitely one.
Let's skip number 4 and let's go to the next one if that's okay. Again, do you want to go to this one?
Well, this is again to repeat a little bit what we have said, no?
Yeah.
Important that I didn't say when I was giving the tips. We usually have people applying several times to several positions. And definitely is no problem. You can do it concomitantly, subsequently, whatever. Tailor your application form to this. Do not just copy paste and put the next one, and remember to put the last job or the current job you have. We have people that are internal candidates who have forgotten to put the last job. So the one in the OSCE, for example, this happens very often. So tailor the motivation letter to everything we have told you before. What's the show fit?
Show fit meaning, how does your experience doing that meet the requirements or make the case that you are fit for what you are applying for? And when you put multiple entries, you're creating a story. And this story is, I am a good candidate for that position. Which is important to mention the what, the why, the how, and for whom, because it is telling the story. And in the talk that we have this afternoon, we're going to teach you tricks on how to actually put your experience in a story type of format. Again, some people may say, well, this is too rehearsed. There's nothing rehearsed about telling your story in a coherent, consistent, professional, intelligent manner. Your job is to make sure that you reduce the noise so that the interviewers can see you for the professionals that you are.
I think we have no more time. I don't know what you're saying.
Could we have 5 minutes to finish? No? Okay.
If you wish, we can have 5 minutes, but you can also continue after the coffee break.
I think we have just 2 slides.
Okay, sure.
You can skip this one, Mike. We've done that. Okay, we talked about action verbs, and I'm going to share this presentation with you guys, so don't even worry about taking pictures if you don't want to. One thing about using action verbs that's important is make sure that you're truthful. Next. And don't lie, because when I was a consultant for PwC, I used to see people working in dentist office saying that they were doing consulting. And then all of a sudden you dig a little bit and you're like, really? Out. Right?
So it's not a matter of lying or not exaggerating. It's just a matter of putting in nice, concise words what you have done.
Exactly. There's nothing like, you need to develop your credibility and establish your credibility when you're putting a thing. So another important thing that I'll finish right now, and this is very important. How do you align with the mandate of the organization? A lot of people are really very willing to join places like the United Nations or the World Bank or maybe OSCE, and they want to do anything to get in. But when it comes to the cover letter or the interview, there's no essence as to why you want to work there. All right? And I was telling people, it's important that you also, do you want to be an OSCE worker, a UN worker, an international civil servant? Show us the reason why that's so, because there's thousands of other people waiting in line. So it's very important that you really say, and one example that I typically give regarding interviews, and I'll finish that in 2 minutes, is when I used to work at the IAEA, people here know the International Atomic Energy Agency. Can you tell me what it does?
Supervised peaceful use of nuclear energy.
Very good. Let me tell you one thing, and this is not about your answer, because this is very right. Supervise the peaceful use of nuclear energy. If I have a candidate, and I say, okay, why do you want to work here? And they say, well, it's an important mandate because of nuclear energy and safeguards. And then I have another candidate that says, well, I find the mandate very interesting because I never knew that you can control the proliferation of the Zika virus by actually using nuclear science and technology to sterilize mosquitoes. And it's really cool that you can actually desalinize water using nuclear isotopes. And the treatment of cancer using nuclear science and technology is something that's very passionate to me. Oh, by the way, you also do safeguards. You put these two candidates together. Am I going with the one that knows what everybody knows? Or am I going with the one who researched the organization and shows passion? Rhetorical question for you. Pregnant pause for thinking. And we are done for now, and we'll come back soon. Thank you.
Video connection to Vienna, to the embassy. We have there our expert, Meri-Maria Java, who is working in the OSCE Secretariat as a mediation support officer. And she has gone through this recruitment process in the OSCE, and she will tell you about her lessons learned and experiences.
Yes?
You can start. Go ahead.
All right. I thought Dina was saying something, but all right. So, sorry for this. Now we're connected. Great to be here, even though not in person. My name is Meri-Maria Java. I'm a seconded mediation support officer at the Operations Service in the OSCE Secretariat's Conflict Prevention Center. I'll talk a little bit first about my work here and then about the recruitment process, how it went for candidates from my point of view. But it was already 3 years ago, so some things might have changed on the way as well. And I hope there will be questions from you at the end. So, first a little bit about myself. Prior to coming to the OSCE, I was working in the CMI in Helsinki and Brussels in various positions. I have also earlier been seconded by Finland in 2008 to 2010 to the European Union monitoring mission in Georgia, where I was working as a reporting and information officer at the mission headquarters in Tbilisi. Now, working as a mediation support officer, I'm responsible, together with colleagues, for providing analytical and operational support in developing the mediation support capacity of the OSCE. This includes, for example, developing and implementing training and capacity building activities and materials, also providing operational support to OSCE mediators, as well as developing and providing operational guidance, also supporting knowledge management and outreach. I also manage our extra budgetary project, which provides funding for our activities, and I also supervise our project assistant. We are a team of 4 persons, 3 mediation support officers and 1 project assistant. And the mediation support team is part of the operations service of the Conflict Prevention Center in the OSCE Secretariat. The operations service does methodological operational support to all the OSCE geographical locations, whereas our colleagues who work in the policy support service, they work on specific geographical areas. So the operations service, in addition to mediation support, works on early warning, operational planning, research and analysis, and so on. My own recruitment, as I said 3 years ago, took about 3 months. The deadline for applications for the position was around somewhere 24th, 25th or so August in 2015, and then I started in my position on 23rd of November. The first deadline for applications was extended. I'm not totally sure why, and my interview was on 21st of October. And then I started 2 weeks after I received the information that I was accepted. So fairly quick, I would say, in considering. 3 years ago, when I was recruited, the OC did not yet use this SONRU video pre-screening system, which is now in place as a first step in the recruitment process. So that was then not yet in place, so I was interviewed and also participated in a written test. The interview was done through a WebEx system, which is another video conference call system, not this same one we're using today, Polycom, which usually works fairly well. My understanding is that usually the WebEx one does not, and brings a certain aspect to the interview. In my interview, it also did not work, so the interview was continued through phone. I would say that if you're not familiar with discussions, meetings, etc., by video phone, maybe it would be a good idea to get a bit of preparation, and also as the video might get connected off, maybe and continued by phone, you might need to think of expressing yourselves with only words and not gestures or facial expressions. The video interview, according to my understanding, is usually in place for candidates for seconded positions, whereas candidates for contracted positions are usually phoned in with the OSC's expense. The video interview and in-person interview are quite different, I would say, different means. That's why, at least I think it's fair and important that for the same position people are interviewed similarly, either remotely or in person. This, I think, is usually the case in the OSC, although I have heard that some seconding authorities want to fly their candidates at their cost. If we think of seconded positions in the Secretariat, they don't usually have many candidates. Not many participating states second to the Secretariat. For example, for my position, I'm sure I was the only candidate, as Finland often, but not always, chooses the candidate it prefers and then proposes that one only. My colleague who was recruited at the same time is German, and for her post, the seconding authority sent 3 candidates. But the OSC would not have chosen 2 Germans, so my competition was at the Finnish end. But it's important to remember that even though one might be the only candidate, it's not a reason to be complacent in the interview or in the written test. I've heard of candidates who were not chosen even if they were the only candidate and the position had been vacant for a long time. The recruitment unit at the OSC Secretariat gave very good support for preparing for the interview. They sent materials, a video clip, so on, about the competency-based interview, which helped me a lot since I had not been having this kind of an interview before and hadn't been in any interview for a while before that. So that was very useful. As you've probably been explained, the competency-based interview is based on the idea that if you've been able to perform something in the past, you would be also able to do it again. And therefore you are asked examples of your past behavior that relate to the competencies that are sought for. And questions could begin with, for example, give you an example of a time when you have done this or that. Questions could be, for example, of a situation you had to persuade someone of a course of action to take, or situations where you had to handle sensitive communication, or situation where you had to coordinate with different types of stakeholders to achieve something. The most important preparation is to think of small stories from your career, which you can then use as these examples. You should take the OSC core competencies and the expertise mentioned in the vacancy notice and be prepared to answer questions on how you demonstrated these competencies. As said, the OSC recruitment unit helped a lot with materials about what this competency-based interview means. There's also other materials available a lot. I think it's useful if you structure your answers according to some mental model. For example, there's something called CAR, where C is the challenge, A is the action, and R is the response. Also in Finnish it exists OTT, or ongelma, tehtävä, tulos, where O is the problem, first T is the task, and the second T is the result. I think I used a model called STAR, which I think was recommended, if I don't remember wrongly, by the OSC recruitment unit, which asks you first to describe the situation, what was happening, what was the context, then the task, what did you want to achieve, what were your aims, then the action, what did you do and why, and the result, what happened, what was the outcome. I myself wrote several small stories along these lines, and then in the interview I tried to pick my brain to come up with the most appropriate. You should always, in this type of interview, think of what you did and refer to I rather than we, so that the board members get a picture of your role. I think there's probably a really little risk of cultural differences here between more individualistic cultures and cultures where it's more, where it's less common to emphasize your own role. But in this process, you really should be clear what you actually did. Were you leading this process or activity? Were you supporting it? Were you implementing a certain part of it or what? I've been in some interview boards in the OSC, and I would advise to think of these stories from different phases of your career, or at least from different tasks and activities you've been involved with. Because even though you might have excellent examples of all the competencies from one particular job you've had, I think it's better to diversify if possible, so the interview board gets a broader picture. Prior to my interview, I had been having discussions with an HR specialist, sort of a coach, unrelated actually to this interview, but in that process we had gone through examples, for example, of successes during my career, and this helped a lot also in preparing the examples for the interview. Most of my questions, most of my answers to the questions were based on these things that I had thought of before. Of course, I had to modify these examples based on what the actual questions were, but mostly I could use those stories that I had thought through earlier. Anyway, I think that the thinking through process was helpful. I would always advise to do so to prepare, even though in the end you might not use all the examples you thought about. Whether you want to write them down as I did or not is of course on how you yourself like to prepare. And just to remember that the competency-based interview is about results and achievement, but that shouldn't prevent you from thinking of what you have learned, for example. You might be asked what you could have done differently, what could have gone better, so it's good to think of this aspect also in advance. I remember I also had a motivational question. It was probably the first one in the beginning to sort of get me started, so this was the more traditional interview question that one is more used to. As part of the interview, there was also a written test. Mine had, if I remember correctly, 2 questions and a time limit of 1 hour. The timing was slightly sparse, I think on purpose. I managed fairly well to finalize what I was doing, I think. When the written test is done remotely, you're allowed to use internet sources, but the sources have to be mentioned in the answers. But when the written test is done at the OC premises, I think the computers then are not connected to the internet. It depends. You probably already heard that how much the written test and how much the interview make of the total score can vary somewhat. So this has been my experience with the recruitment process at the OC, and just to summarize, I'd say read carefully the vacancy notice, especially the competencies that are required, and think in advance of your prior career, or why not voluntary work or other experience. I don't think it necessarily needs to be only of jobs, although that probably is prepared, but especially in the beginning of your career, it could be from somewhere else as well, studies also. And then be prepared to answer questions with these examples, with clarity on what your role was in a specific situation and how you managed in the end to achieve results. What else? No, I think that's what I wanted to say now, and I'd be happy if there's questions that you'd like to pose.
Thank you very much, Mary. Do we have some questions?
I have a comment to make. Excellent presentation. I don't even think I need to present that to you, so thank you for that. Thank you, because you repeated a lot of what we said. I am from the OSCE, and so is Marta, so we've heard a lot about you, by the way. And regarding the video interviews, the goal is actually to move more towards conducting more video interviews rather than bringing people over for professional positions. Unless these are of supervisory duties or positions that really need someone to come in person, especially given the current budget constraints that we have. And I do understand that WebEx does not work as well. And one of the things that we've done this year is actually purchase, despite the crisis, 2 teleconference systems to make sure that we have better and professional equipment to actually handle candidates in a more professional manner. I think that was it. You had a comment?
Yes, thank you for the great presentation. We will also, so she mentioned about the weight of the interview versus the written test. We will go to that a little bit later after the coffee break. So we explained to you how much importance we give to the interview vis-a-vis the written test, which are the 2 evaluation tools, so to say, we use in order to assess the suitability of the candidates at the OSCE. Anybody else has a comment or question?
Thank you. I don't know if you're going to go through this in the afternoon about the written test, but I was wondering, is it always similar? Is it about the content? If you can use the internet, like, what are the questions?
Yeah, so we will definitely go through this.
If I may, while you're moving the microphone, no, it's not always the same. Mine, for example, was quite specific to my or to the vacancies, to my job, and I think actually the questions were very pertinent so they were actually done by also the written test by someone who clearly knew very well of what the role should be.
Yes, absolutely correct. And I would add that written tests are there to assess the technical knowledge. So there will be much more on technical things, on, for example, preparing speaking points for the Secretary General, for example, if that's pertinent, or a case scenario where you need to analyze something and solve it, so to say. Much more the competencies that are analyzed during the interview. The written tests are, by the way, anonymously sent to the panel members who will then evaluate them based on a guideline that has been given by the expert, by the hiring department. So when we are scoring tests, we do not know who we are scoring, who the candidate is, for fairness and transparency purposes. And usually it is true, Mary, that we give you enough time to read the question, take some notes, understand, and start drafting, then revise it very quickly and give it in. It's true, and it's on purpose. It's true that it's a stressful situation, but because, you know, we want to really put you on the spot in that sense, to see, you know, how you manage your time. And what else did you mention? And about the internet, sometimes it is allowed or sometimes it is not allowed, depending on the context and what we want to see in the written test. So sometimes it is allowed even if you do it from home or in our premises, and sometimes it's not allowed. Yeah.
Anybody else? Just to add, you mentioned the interviews. We have money in the MFA budget to actually to send the candidates for a face-to-face interview if this is it's a possibility. Well, of course, based on the proposal as well. Yeah.
Can I mention what I think at this day and age it's very important to mention something as well. And I've worked in 3 international organizations, and all of them but the OSCE did people. No other previous UN organizations that I've worked at actually include people. the United Nations now is actually going through, recently, UNDP hired a lot of, if I'm not mistaken, assistant secretary generals. They interview them by video. If the UN is interviewing assistant secretary generals via video, I see no reason why the OSCE couldn't do AP2, AP3, AP4. That's my humble opinion. So we're gonna get a nice conference system, very large screen. Our interviewers are very familiar. It gets to a point when I was at the IAEA that it made absolutely no difference whether the person was in person or via video because the screen is so huge and it's just a small quarter. So there are ways to make arrangements for that. In the end, the important thing is not whether or not you are in person. It's your experience, how you talk about your experience, and whether or not you're fit for the job.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? If not,
I have one. Hi. You mentioned that the whole recruitment process took 3 months altogether. How much time did you have to organize your private life or your personal life? You have to change country and find an apartment and so on.
Yeah, thanks. As I said, when I heard that I had been chosen, I started 2 weeks after that. I was asked to start 10 days, but I couldn't because I had committed to something before that. I think this is very quick and people don't usually necessarily do that so quickly, but I didn't have anything to... I packed a suitcase and left. That was it. I booked an Airbnb for the first weeks and so on. I still have my apartment in Helsinki, so I'm not. I could have left the next day because I was not. I was in between jobs at that moment. Of course, it depends if you're employed somewhere and need to make more arrangements in your current job. So I think mine was quite quick. These two weeks. When I heard that I'd gotten the job, actually pre-deployment training in Kuopio was just starting then. So I called them and said I can come. I'll take the train and I'll be there in a couple of hours. I'll just miss the first part, so that was a good coincidence also. But instead I had been seconded before as well, so I knew part of that, so I didn't need the whole of the pre-deployment training. So that was quick. Usually it's not that quick. But in terms of when you start after you've been chosen, but that I think depends on the person and is probably negotiable when you would be asked when you can start. That's my experience also when being in an interview panel, that you would be asked, and then there is flexibility usually, I'm sure.
And just for information as well regarding timelines for recruitment, because international organizations are notorious for having a delayed process compared to the private sector, and I can attest to that. On average, from research that I've seen with the United Nations, it takes approximately between 216 and 260 days to process an application at the UN Secretariat from vacancy issuing until the person starting the job. 216, 260 days. At the OSCE, for contracted positions, this is an average of 113 days, which is a lot shorter. I would love to see that even shorter, but that's not possible. Because we have to have multiple stakeholders validate the selections. Typically, we have to present 2, if not 3, suitable people with different nationalities to the Secretary General, to the appropriate individuals who will be the appointing authority, could be also the missions, the heads of institutions, or the missions per se. And one last thing as well regarding the start date. Obviously for secondment, this needs to be arranged with your seconding authority, but a good trick for people getting into international civil service is actually thinking that typically in international organizations, if you have a fixed term contract, especially in the UN, there is a rule that you have to give 3 months notice if you are on a fixed term contract. On a temporary assistance contract, it's 1 month. So what I'm saying between the lines is, if they expect other international civil servants moving from UNDP to the IAEA, and they have to give a 3 months notice, you can convince them otherwise, convince your current boss, or convince to wait, but there is a certain understanding between the organizations that there has to be a certain amount of time. It could be potentially around 3 months to facilitate the transition. After all, you are moving countries with your spouses, children, and all that. So not everyone is as flexible to just drop everything, like I did, and move from New York to Vienna, or a friend there, but we also understand that we need to adjust to your needs as applicants.
Thank you, Gustavo. Any more questions? No, then we would like to thank very much Mary. Thank you all for this information and sharing your experience. And bye.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, and have a good end of your seminar.
Thank you.
Then the following speaker is our colleague from the Ministry of Interior, from the Police Department, Jaakko Christensen, who is the Assistant Police Director there. He has extensive experience from the UN, who we promised to say yes.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon. Put up my presentation. So, briefly to share one experience, this time from the UN, on my recruitment, and I'll run through the process, not just for the sake of it, but to try and give you some ideas of what my preparation was, some of the issues that came up, and maybe give you some ideas on your own preparations. I understand that approximately half of you have prior foreign mission experience, either in civilian crisis management or military, and a number of you, I understand, also have far more experience in these than myself. But this is just one example, and please interrupt me if you'd like to ask or comment something. Some of this will be repeating what Mary Maria already mentioned, because processes are very similar in recruitment. But as she also mentioned, and I think that you've discussed this in the beginning of the sessions, that the idea is that past behavior and experience is the best indicator of future performance. Now about the competency-based recruitment, development, and then also the performance evaluations. They all use the same UN core values and competencies, 3 UN core values: integrity, professionalism, and respect for diversity. And in all of the announcements and the interviews, professionalism will be one of the issues that will be covered. Core competencies, I won't read them through, but again, this is not only for recruitment, but through the UN personal development and then the performance assessments. So your performance are evaluated against these competencies. And then if in a managerial position, then separate UN managerial competencies. Typically in the vacancy announcements in the UN, there will be 1 core value, professionalism, 2 core competencies, and if it's a managerial position, then 2 to 3 managerial competencies. And then, consequently, then these issues will be, or these competencies will be those that are then tested in the interview. And not all of them are used in the interviews, but a number of 1 or 2 of those might then be selected for the interview questions. So, unlike Meri-Maria's recruitment, which took a few months, mine was slightly longer, more than 2 years. And started in May 2014, I was asked by the Ministry of Interior to apply for a post to a roster, a senior police leadership roster. And I have to tell you a little secret that I wasn't really at that point looking for a UN post, but when I was invited by the ministry to apply, then I thought, well, yes, why not? And then also had the understanding that it would be practically impossible to become a UN official or an employee. It seemed a far reach, but I thought that I'd give it a go. So a couple of months were passed, and I thought, well, after the application, that's probably it. I was already disqualified, but in October the same year, I was invited to a written test, and then started to prepare for it. I had no prior UN experience. My experience had been 6 years altogether with the Office of the High Representative in Bosnia, 2 years in Kosovo, and then in shorter missions in Georgia, Jordan, and in Zambia. So I started, dove in headfirst into the UN terminology, UN documentation, and well, I'll show you later on if you like. It's a 2-page list of UN key documents, and in my case relating to policing. So it was general UN documentation, policies, guidelines, and then there's quite a number of them also for my field of work, which is policing in general, and then also mission-specific documents, which are really important to familiarize yourself with when applying. So really, the more you work in preparation, the better your standing is also in the written test and especially in the interview. Another piece of documentation, the UN planning toolkit, I thought was quite useful. UN terminology, probably also in the OSC, is quite specific, and there's a multitude of abbreviations that are quite specific in terminology that are something that you might not use in your everyday language, but you need to be aware of and you need to use. And the more perhaps you use those also in the interview, the sort of professional or up to the job picture you can give to the interviewing panel. Also the planning hierarchy and the methodology, the tools, it was really useful to familiarize myself with that. And I also prepared by, well, making up a plan according to the toolkit, the different levels of planning, which are quite generic, not specific for policing. And I thought that was one good way of preparing for the written test. The test then eventually was 150 minutes, 2 A4 page maximum, and I think I used it to the last minute and the last line of the A4 page. And I was quite satisfied with myself. I thought it went quite well. But then again, wasn't really confident that I passed any threshold. The case scenario that you asked about Meri-Maria's I think these are quite specific for each post. In my case, it was a fictitious African mission, and I was asked as head of police component to devise a plan for the head of mission for an upcoming election. I was given the number of FPUs, or foreign police units, and IPOs, that are individual police officers, that I could use in different parts of the country that had different security threats. And to do that in a structured, limited space was quite a challenge, but it went quite well, that part of the recruitment. Then again, nothing, so I thought, okay, that's it. That was my shot at going to work for the UN. But then in March, the following year, I was asked to be interviewed over teleconference, and I have to say, quite a difficult task. It's far easier to be interviewed face to face than over the phone. But again, studying UN documentation, preparing, and as Meri-Maria explained, writing little stories for myself from my experience to meet the competencies that in my case were, you can just hold on a second. Yes, the competencies for the post that I was, or for the roster that I was applying, was professionalism, planning and organizing, client orientation, leadership and vision. So thinking of past experiences and preparing to tell these little stories. By the way, there is a multitude of advice available openly on the net also for applying to UN posts. Some tips at this point: provide more than one contact number. As we saw, technical issues sometimes happen, and it's good to not cause any hassle for the interviewing panel, because in my case, well, there are 2 interviews, and in both of them, I guess, there's interview panel members in New York, so entirely different time zone, and then interview panel members that are in more my own time zone, and they have a tight schedule and are available only for that certain period. Also, the interview panel has to be made up of it's gender balanced, nationality balanced, so they're available only for a certain period. So do everything that you can to be available as agreed. Be ready well in advance. In my case, I was ready well in advance, but they also called me, I think it was half an hour early, 20 minutes early, but then in the next interview it was then half an hour late. So structure your timetable so that you're ready to take a call early. I guess probably an early call will not be usual, because they're one interview after the other, and usually you sort of tend to go over the time slot. Meri-Maria described how to build the short cases, including positive outcomes, lessons learned from each case, and to have situation, action, and results. And Meri-Maria was correct in saying that, especially, let's say, in a teamwork or managerial position, then you would often describe what was happening or what you were doing as we did something, and what the interview panel often, including myself, we would ask interviewees that please tell us specifically what you did as a team member or as a manager. What was your role in that specific case? And as I mentioned, I had the 2 interviews. In one I had 3 panel members, and in another one there were 8. I don't think that tricky questions are part of the structure of an interview, but It seemed to me that they were also, let's say, testing my ability to take pressure. In a number of answers, there was a awkward silence of a few seconds, and then the chair of the panel asked that, "Is this your answer?" And then, you're sort of, well, did I leave something out? But then I just said, yes, that's my answer. I'm ready to take on the next question. Another one was this question that what is your biggest challenge in a mission? And there was no sort of situation given. So I was thinking that what is the right answer to this? It could be the risk of being shot at, the environment, the weather, deadly disease, your counterparts, local counterparts are difficult to work with, traffic is deadly, so a number of issues, and I tried to sort of mumble through some of those, and again, was that your answer? And well, at that point I thought, well, that's it. This did not go down very well, so as this was an interview or a recruitment process for a roster, not for a specific position, I was then asked to apply for a senior police advisor position, and had this 8-panel member interview, and again some of them in the mission setting and others, or mission location, and others in New York. Well, I'll come to it later on, but also language issues are sometimes quite difficult in the interview. Here again, the interview I thought went better, but then eventually I heard that it had gone not so well. So it's really difficult also to say that how the well, at least in my case, it was difficult to say did it go well or not. March 2016, I was informed that I was accepted to UN Senior Police Leadership roster, and at the same time that there were 2 posts that were open for recruitment from the roster, one of which I turned down, but then there was another a week later that was offered that I then accepted, and October 2016 was informed that I was accepted, and then eventually started on the 1st of December. So, as I mentioned, the competencies that I mentioned in the vacancy announcements will be then those, or from those, some of which you will be tested against or interviewed for. As the interviewing panel will come from different nationalities, their English language capabilities or accents, styles, speeds will be quite difficult, and when added to the technical issues of teleconference, then it's sometimes really difficult to catch. So you should not be intimidated by that, and just ask again, but please repeat the question so that you can give the answer, because that's also what the interview panel will want from you. Clear things like brushing up your own language skills if that's necessary. Using the UN or other organizational terminology, familiarize yourself with abbreviations and terms used. Pay attention to gender issues, and gender mainstreaming is always one of the questions in the interview, and cases also from your experience need to be prepared for that. Be concise in your answers, more concise than I've been in this presentation. and try and build interesting stories, short stories that Meri-Mari also mentioned from your own experience. And as a Finn, don't be modest and show confidence in your answers. And part of that confidence will come from a good preparation and practicing mock interviews. You might use a family member or colleagues in giving it a go a couple of times, practicing speaking out loud in English. All right. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you a blessed afternoon.
So the first thing we're going to do is run a video for you so that you know the basics of what the OSCE. I'm sure everybody's pretty familiar with it. Maybe not all of the areas of the security when we talk about comprehensive security and where we are and how it is distributed and how it is structured. So it's just a 2-minute video. And then we will go into the competency-based and also in general the recruitment process. Once you have applied, because what we showed you before is how to apply. So now let's assume or pretend that you have already applied for a position.
With 57 participating states in Europe, Asia, and North America, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe is the world's largest regional security organization. The OSCE is an inclusive forum for dialogue on security issues and a platform for joint action to improve the lives of individuals and communities throughout the OSCE area. The OSCE's approach to security is comprehensive, and its engagement covers many relevant areas, from hard security issues such as conflict prevention and arms control, to fostering economic development, ensuring the sustainable use of natural resources, and promoting full respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. The OSCE traces its origins to the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, which led to the signing of the Helsinki Final Act in 1975, a groundbreaking agreement that established 10 fundamental principles for governing relations between states, focusing on cooperation and the peaceful settlement of disputes. Today, the OSCE is an intergovernmental organization in which all 57 participating states work as equals. Decisions are taken by consensus on a politically binding basis. Each year, a different participating state chairs the organization, with that country's foreign minister serving as chairperson in office. A ministerial council meeting is held annually to review OSCE activities and provide overall direction, while ambassadors meet each week in Vienna at the Permanent Council and the Forum for Security Cooperation. The OSCE has several structures, each with its own area of competence and mandate. The OSCE Secretary General acts as the representative of the chairperson in office and supports him or her in all activities aimed at advancing the goals of the OSCE. The Secretary General is also the organization's chief administrative officer and heads the Secretariat based in Vienna, which directly supports the chairmanship. As a tool of conflict prevention, the High Commissioner on National Minorities, based in The Hague, uses quiet diplomacy and early action to seek resolution of ethnic tensions that might endanger peace, security, and stability. The representative on freedom of the media, based in Vienna, provides early warning on violations of freedom of expression and media freedom, and promotes full compliance with OSCE media freedom commitments. The Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, based in Warsaw, promotes respect for human rights, fundamental freedoms, and the rule of law, strengthens democratic institutions, and promotes tolerance and non-discrimination, and acts as the OSCE contact point on Roma and Sinti issues. The Parliamentary Assembly brings together more than 300 lawmakers from the parliaments of OSCE participating states to promote interparliamentary dialogue and cooperation. Most of the OSCE's staff and resources are deployed in field operations that support their host countries in the implementation of their OSCE commitments, or, like the Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine, are engaged in crisis management or conflict prevention activities. The OSCE helps to bridge differences and build trust. At no time in recent history has this mission been more vital for European security than it is today. In times of growing division within Europe and increasingly complex transnational and global threats and challenges, the OSCE remains a key regional platform for inclusive dialogue and joint action.
So that you can also see not only what the Secretariat does, but also, of course, for the field operations group, which is where we have most of our staff, and also the three institutions.
All right, so I guess we'll go back to the presentation itself. And we do have quite a beefed up agenda, but we have about 2 hours, and we're going to have some practical exercise with you guys so that we make sure that you get out of here with some experience and information about how to act in a real life situation, okay? So we're going to start talking about what is a competency-based interview and why CBIs are used. Then we're going to go over what is a competency and what types of questions are considered competency-based.
Third one would be how do you recognize competence from a job description. This we have done before, but we're going to really focus on the competency themselves. And also how do you answer these competency-based questions. And we have seen some examples, Mary and Jakob already spoke about this, but we will go to the practical side. And yes, there are many ways of preparing and tackling competency-based questions. Star, stars, card, you can call it whatever. The essence is exactly the same, and we will go through this as well. We're going to do mock interviews, so as we announced before, we're going to make you talk and work.
Yeah, so depending on time, we can break you up into pairs or trios so that we can practice some of the new skills that you can gain today, okay? We're going to skip this part, but right now, I want you guys to think about selection methods. When you're dealing with finding the right people for the job, what are the typical selection methods that you choose? Can somebody give me some examples? Okay, reviewing the application form. So the types of information that you request in the application form, including experience, length of experience, activities and achievements, can be considered a selection method. Anything else?
Personality tests, interviews.
Very good. Personality tests and interviews. We have 3. Anything else?
I have one.
Yeah.
Gut feeling. This person just says something to me so similar and so I really feel identified with this person.
All right.
That's another way of selecting.
Anything else? Go ahead.
Testing.
Say that again?
Testing, so not personality test, but test of competence.
Exactly. So in that case, it would be, sorry about that, it would be something like written tests or even technical tests or competency types of tests, right? So let me put this in here for us to see. One would be interviews, application form, technical tests, psychometrics, maybe scenarios or case studies. These are just a few, right? Let's say that you are running an organization and you want to hire people. and you want to find out, you don't have that much money, surprise, surprise. You want to find out which of these selection methods are going to give you the best bang for your buck by thinking about the predictive validity. For example, we also have references. Reference checking can be a selection method, right? You just call the references and say yay or nay. In your conception, just looking at each item independently, not an aggregate value, okay? From 0 to 100, how much does references, or how much do reference checks actually predict someone's potential success on a job? From 0 to 100. Any values? Go ahead.
I think 100, because if it doesn't check, that's 100.
So you would believe that by checking references you can fully trust someone who could do the job?
No, I mean, if there is no match, then it's a problem.
But I'm talking about if you are to use one selection method, and you want to say by using this I know a certain percentage of confidence that person can do the job. You?
I would be in the, I would say about 50, 25 to 50, but I think there's a lot of manufacturing of references and a lot of false references out there.
Okay, so between 25 and 50% of the variance in success in the job. Everybody following me in this exercise? Good. Application form. Just by looking at the application form, if you are to use this as the only selection method, how much would this actually predict success on the job? You're shaking your head almost desperately. What's your take?
5.
5? Oh, 5. All right. Interviews. And I'm talking about something like this. Let's call it unstructured interviews. Like, okay.
Conversation.
Conversation. Every candidate gets a different set of questions. Some of the interviewers are on the phone all the time. There is no idea of competency. It's a conversation, an unstructured interview. How much would that ascribe for the predictability? What number would you give me?
30.
Huh?
30.
30, okay. How about technical tests? You do a written test, a technical test to find out whether or not the candidate could potentially be a success in the job. Anybody else can give me a hint of a
30 also.
30 also?
I think it depends on the job description.
Okay. So on average, right? Psychology is all about the
I
averages.
would put much more for the interview than 30.
So this is, okay, so let's do a 50 here. How about psychometrics, personality assessment and something like that? What number would you give me in predicting someone's ability to do the job well?
15.
Okay. And scenarios like case studies and simulations and things of that nature. The last one.
If they're well-made scenarios, so you're actually testing how they behave, I would give that the highest.
The highest?
Yeah.
Being like 70, 80?
Maybe 60 to 70.
50 through 80. Okay. Now I'm going to show you a graph as to what science has found out about it, if I can find it quicker, which apparently I've lost it. Danke. All right. So moving on. This is what science has found out. So let's start at the bottom here. Graphology, astrology, and age. Zero ability to predict success and fit on the job. Moving upwards, reference checks, so interest, so just checking years of experience. 0.1, so 10% of the variance. Moving up to unstructured interviews, just a conversation, okay? 30. Moving up to assessment centers for job performance using biographical data plus personality assessment. Putting these together, or those individually, 0.4. Work sampling, 0.5. Here we have skillful and structured interviews, 0.6. So skillful and structured interviews, like competency-based interviews that follow a certain structure and assess for competencies that are known to predict whether or not people will be successful in the job by requesting examples from your past life, are potentially capable to predict 60% of someone's ability to potentially do the job well. Taught only by assessment centers for development, which are those assessment centers in which people are flown together to a certain location, have to go through psychometrics, have to engage in group interviews, and it costs $20,000 per person. I don't think we can engage with that, unfortunately. It's impossible to have a certain prediction. So we go with the next best thing, which is the 60% that's highlighted in yellow right there. And on top of that, we also try to do a work sampling or a written test. So this is why you see competency-based interviews with all its faults still being used as the quintessential tool for selection. To the point that Google and other big companies actually started getting away from competency-based interviews and asking questions such as, would you prefer to fight 100 small ducks or a giant duck? To see how people thought. And they decided that this wasn't working too good. And they went back to good old CBI. All right? So what is a competency-based interview? And the gentleman who talked to us before gave us a definition. Can anybody remember what it was? Broadly? Remember? Yeah. Anybody remembers broadly the definition of a competency-based interview? I'll give you a informal definition. It's an interview that uses your past experiences to make a determination whether or not you will act successfully in a similar way in the future. In other words, by looking at whether or not you've done the tasks, you've acted a certain way, you've actually conducted the work correctly, if you learn from your mistakes, that you will in the future act in a similar manner. So pretty much this is a definition. Anything to add, Marta?
Yeah, I would have one very important thing, which is in terms of objectivity and transparency. Competency-based interviews ask exactly the same questions, ask the same way to every single candidate, so you can compare apples with apples or pears with pears. And also that you, as a candidate, have the peace of mind that everybody's being asked the same, not less, not more, and that so the process is transparent and the decision can be taken objectively. This person demonstrated this competency in a stronger way than this one, because we're measuring the same thing.
Very good. So moving on, what do competency-based interviews look like at the OSCE? Marta is the perfect person to
Oh my God, okay, let me look at this. So, competency-based interviews, let's say you have already applied, as we told you, you have been longlisted, and then you have been invited to an interview. The interview, depending on many things, we explained this before, for seconded positions, we always do interviews via WebEx, so teleconference. For some contracted positions, or more and more, or most contracted positions in the future, interviews will also be teleconference, and others are still in person. So you will be either invited to come to the interview, or it will be done via teleconference. They usually take 45 to 60 minutes, and usually have 8 to 10 questions. And this is important. So you to take the watch, put it on the table, and use not less but not more time than this. Not less, not less. So this is also important, not to be so concise that in 20 minutes you answered 8 questions, because there you're missing opportunities. 8 to 10 questions, out of which usually 6 are competency-based. Not all of them are competency-based. Some are technical, and some are motivation and availability and so on, but the others will be competency-based. There will be a panel of 3 to 5 interviewers, usually it's 4 interviewers, and the composition of the panel is regulated by your staff instruction 17 on recruitment practices. We cannot just take anybody and put that person in the panel. It has to be the hiring department. It has to be the rest of the panel members have to be at least on at the same level as the position that is being interviewed. And everybody must have our hiring great people training course that shows them exactly how to behave, what to do, what to expect, and what their obligations are as panel members. Anything?
No, a representative from another agency as well to give an outside type of perspective, a well-rounded perspective of the candidate, or an HR representative, which could be someone at a lower level or same level or higher level who could be responsible for the report, and the secretary to the board who is the person who is literally doing the report per se on behalf of the HR representative. Yeah. In other UN organizations that I've worked, this could be slightly different. For example, one of the organizations I worked at had an interview about 60 minutes with 10 to 12 questions and about 5 interviewers that followed this. Other organizations may have also 8 questions only with 3 board members. So it depends on, again, the type of position you're applying for. There's big difference sometimes whether you're applying for a fixed-term position versus a short-term position or temporary assignment or consultancy and secondment and things of that nature. But for secondment and internationally contracted positions, this is typically what we find.
I would also add that for some positions, the interview is reduced maybe to 30 minutes, 40 minutes. The rest of the time you're asked to prepare a presentation beforehand and to bring it and to present. 10 minutes presentation with some questions and then competency-based questions. This is also very typical, not only in the OECD, but for example at the IAEA, for example. This is very, very typical.
All right, so moving on, what is a competency? Can anybody think of a definition? Sir?
I believe perform a task.
Great. A good example is this. It's the combination of skills, attributes, and behaviors that is directly related to successful performance of a job. Again, skills, attributes, and behavior. Just thinking about driving a car. What do you need to drive a car? What kind of skills do you need to drive a car? Motor skills. Cognitive skills, also to understand traffic rules and regulations. Attributes, hopefully you don't have sociopathic personality so that you go run over people. Behaviors, hopefully checking the rear view and signal. A lot of people don't do. Go ahead.
You need a sustainable development consultant there because you have examples of cars which should be avoided steers.
Yeah. So this is just a generic example to kind of drive to mind exactly what we're looking at, okay? So what questions should you expect at the beginning? Our role, and I know that our previous speaker, he mentioned something that was interesting, he said trick questions, and I think that what he meant by trick questions was questions that will make you think on your feet. Questions that will help us judge your ability to think last minute and to determine priorities in what you consider to be an appropriate answer. That's why they can be broad. Some candidates may dig their own grave with this question, others will find the light. It's the answer in between. Okay? Marta, could you walk us through this?
Yes, so basically the questions that the core part of the interview, as we said, is going to be competency-based. But it is true that we do ask other questions because we want to know more things about it. It's not only about competencies, it's also about why you have applied. And you get very interesting answers regarding that. And it's also about what you have done in the past that you can actually apply to this position. So you will definitely get what we usually call warm-up questions, which are warm-up, but they have to be, we are expecting substantive answers there on your past 2 jobs, your past years of experience, and what this can be applied to the position. So usually it's a warm-up question because usually candidates have prepared for this one. But you need to give substantial answers. Not too lengthy, not too short, as I said, not too concise, but you have to give substantial answers there. And definitely we will ask you for your motivation. We want to know why you have applied. And sometimes people focus more on the position itself, sometimes on the organization. My recommendation is to go from general to particular, to more specific. So why this organization specifically, and why this department or area or field of expertise, this position in particular. And then, of course, the critical incidents. So things in your application form that you have not explained and that jump at somebody's eyes when you see them. For example, 1-2 years where you do not reflect what you have been doing. If it's 2 years, it's a lot of time, so it would be good then there to also mention what you have been doing, why, and it can be any reason. It can be, hey, I was out because I had a baby, for example, or I was out because I was traveling or something. No, it would be good to mention this, not to expect that panel members will ask you, because they might not ask, they might ask the question. So why not mention it?
And the panel members are also trained, especially the good ones that have support, to people can choose to be aggressive in asking critical incidents. It's not a problem to have a critical incident in your life. Absolutely not a problem. It's all about how you frame that within the context of the interview. Some panel members may choose to go, okay, I see a gap in your resume. Other, more intelligent panel members say, oh, look, it seems like I don't see something between the dates of so-and-so. Could you tell me more about that? It gets to the same answer. You should expect that. And again, to your history and how that may contribute or not to the job you apply for.
Yeah. Maybe something else that could count as critical incident?
Yes, I was going to mention another thing, which is, and this happens probably more often than gaps, moments where you say you have been studying and you have been working at the same time. So overlaps, for example, or 2 jobs, 2 destinations, 2 locations. That's also a bit strange. It can happen. It can happen that I'm working here, but I'm actually located somewhere else, and I'm working for a company, and now I'm located at the client's company. Something like this. So this can also happen. There are people that study and work at the same time. This can also be an incident where you say, but how can this person do these 2 things at the same time? So if it's really true, of course, it has to be true. You need it's good if you explain it.
I never forget, I was once interviewing a young lady who was for a position in one of the UN organizations, and she had a gap, and she put something sabbatical or whatever. She didn't actually detail. And I said, so what were you doing during that year? She said, I was actually biking through the station. And the question I asked was, tell us about the experience. What did you learn? That made me want to hire her even more, because that showed other types of skills that could be related to the position. Why use competencies? A definition that we can say is the following: designed to see how you demonstrated a competency in the past, a behavior in the past, to predict how you might react in a similar situation in the future. There are 2 key words in that sentence: past, future. Your job is to show that in the past, in your present, have prepared you for the future job with us.
Yeah,
make it easier.
I would also add that we're dealing with human beings. This is not an exact science.
Yeah.
So we need to look at the past in order to predict, not be sure and certain what could happen in the future. So this is the best way of doing it. And as I said, this is not an exact science, so we cannot there's no certain prediction.
So now we're going to do a very quick exercise, okay? What I'm going to do is the following: groups of 2. We are going to give you 3 minutes, the person next to you. We're going to give you 3 minutes to actually look at this job description for an associate finance officer. That may not be related to any of you, but that's a position that you find in any international organization. And what we'd like you to do is to look at the competencies or the values or the managerial competencies next to it, and try and extricate one or two competencies from all of these descriptions. Does that make sense? So we'll give you 3 minutes starting now. The person immediately right next to you.
No ainakin jotain taloutta, kun sitä lukee eteenpäin, niin aina
onko se sitten kompetenssi? Mä vaan mietin, että vaikka tuossa voi jakaa yhtään mitään.
No ei tässä ole ainakaan leadershipia. Ei tarvitse. Ainakin jotain muuta.
Kakkonen, niin sitten se on
One more minute. So, has anybody come up with a competency for the first description there. Marta, could you read the first one for us?
Sure. Not monitoring the proper maintenance of the asset register in close collaboration with the asset management and logistics units, performing regular conciliations of accounts related with property, plant, and equipment, intangible assets, and inventory.
Is there any managerial core competence or core value that could be applied to that?
Collaboration and accountability.
That's one. Any other one?
Well, that's two.
We choose analysis and decision making.
Okay, anything else? In the back? You raise your hand.
Yeah, I was going to say analysis and decision making, but if we go to core values, then I would say integrity as well.
Okay, anything else? So you see, there are a few that can be tapped on, and it's up to the hiring manager and the board members to actually pick one of those to inquire about and drill you down. And we're going to do more exercises to delve into that, okay? Do you have something to say?
I would add also, when you're thinking about competencies, do not only think about these that we in the OSCE agreed on as being the core competencies. There are many others that would apply to specific apart from these. So when you're thinking about this, do not only take these, but look at the whole list of competencies. Okay?
How about this one? Keep abreast of changes in IPSAS. IPSAS is the accounting system model that the United Nations and international organizations follow. Accounting standards and propose changes to accounting treatment of transactions to ensure continued IPSAS compliance. Okay, initiative taken and planning. Anything else? Strategic thinking. So your job is to look at all of these items in the tasks and responsibilities and think about the following. Which competencies do I think will be extricated from this particular description? And if so, what are the examples that I have from my current job or my past experiences that may help me show the board members that I have these specific competencies? Remember earlier this morning? Yeah. Earlier today, when we talked about behavior indicators, that there are negative indicators and positive indicators. It's all about how you actually define the competencies yourself. Luckily, you don't have to define the OSCE competencies because you can find this online. We do have an entire digital booklet with the competencies and a description of the indicators. All you have to do is go to jobs.osce.org. And then you can find this booklet, you can take a look at it, and you can put it next to the job description. Just because a job description has all of the competencies listed, that doesn't mean that all the competencies assessed may be necessarily there. There could be other types of skills and attributes and behaviors that are related directly to the competency that could be asked, because it's part of conducting due diligence in hiring someone. So far, so good? Yeah? So we'll move on to the next one. How are competencies assessed? I love that one of the speakers mentioned something like challenge, actions, and results. Someone also talked about problems, actions, and results. You can create your own. There isn't such a thing as just a formula, but there are multiple ways that you can not only assess competencies, but talk about your competencies. Marta, could you show us the three of them?
Yeah, so as we were saying, these are in essence the same structure. All of them contain the first part where you need to put the situation in context. You need to tell the panel members who have no idea about what happened, when this happened, where this happened, in which context, and so on. And also what your mission was, your task, what you're doing there, why are you in that situation. This is definitely the same for all the structures. And the action, this will be repeated in everyone because this is probably the most important one. Once the panel members know what happened, when it happened, with whom you were, what was your role. And they want to know exactly what you did. And this is always across any type of structure that you have for competency-based, no matter which. And in all of them, you will always have to mention what happened and who took that action. Not what happened with the situation that in the end your supervisor decided to, or whatever. What was the result of your action? That's the most important thing when we talk about result. I personally like this one the best, because although it's the most complex, so you need to be mindful of the time, it can take you 6 minutes to explain something like this. And 6 minutes is a long time for 4 people to listen to you. And then the next question, and then the next question. I like it because this is what predicts the future. What I would do the next time if it happens to me. So there we are actually saying, you know, if the same thing happens to me, I would act like this, differently, or the same, but I learned this other thing, and that's what I would do differently.
The UN has a great competency-based interview course online. You can actually look for it, and they use CAR, for example. Context, action, and results. I have a trick and a tip for you. If you ever go through a competency-based interview, most likely, or hopefully, one of the panel members, hopefully HR, will say, and be mindful that if you want to jot down a few notes before you start answering your questions, please do so. That's your cue and opportunity to write down SMART, or write down STAR, or write down CAR. And orchestrate, I hate that verb, arrange, organize your thoughts in a way that will guide you to provide the answer in a structured manner. Again, what you're doing is not concocting something that didn't happen. It's organizing your thoughts so you reduce the noise around you and you increase the board's ability to pay attention to the answer. Okay?
And
go ahead.
I would add to this that doing this STAR thing that Gustavo said is very important and is exactly what panel members are doing as well. At least that's what we teach them. So they are also putting the STAR, and they're also waiting for you to say the situation, for you to say the task, for you to say the action, and for you to say the result. So there's a good alignment there, and there's the same structure, and it's a very good connection, it's a very good rapport, the one that you get with the panel if you do it like this. You need to prepare for these, definitely, because I can tell you my first experience as a candidate, when they asked me competency-based, I didn't know it was going to be a competency-based interview. I had not prepared. Probably 5 of the questions happened a long time ago, So I have the excuse. Probably 3 out of the 5 questions, I just didn't know. I was blank. I could not think of examples. And I had them because the moment I closed the door and I left, they all came to me. So if you fail to prepare, prepare to fail. You will not these examples if you don't practice them, if you don't think, if you don't write them down and structure them the way we are recommending.
And there is one thing that good interviewers are always trained on, which is follow-up questions. Then you catch people who make creating examples to make an impression. Because if you say that you delivered training for 300 people in a span of 20 months, you bet that I'm going to ask you, so what was the training about? What were the difficulties with the training? Who organized that for you? Oh, okay, tell me more. What did you learn from that? By the time I am on my 6th follow-up question, your lie is out the door. And so is your application. So you have to be very mindful about the fact that people use and people are trained to actually recognize patterns. Okay? So here are some of the leading questions that you can ask yourself to prepare. The S stands for situation, and it stands for what was the specific event or situation. M
stands for mission. What was the mission, or the objective, or the goal you wanted to accomplish?
A stands for action. What did you actually do?
Results. What was the final result of the outcome of your action?
And this is a made-up word. Teachability, meaning what are the lessons? What would you have done differently? This is a very important question because it shows that the person is able to learn from experience, be a mature professional, make mistakes, and move on. There's this new trend right now in hiring people regarding, especially in organizations that tend to be more forward-thinking, modern, meaning that you also want people who are able to make mistakes, recognize mistakes, and learn from those mistakes and make innovation out of those mistakes. You do not want to base your entire interview on just mistakes. But if you get questions about, tell me about a situation in which you failed to meet deadlines and why. Take that as an opportunity to think of an example and to show them that you learned from it and that you would have done something different and that you actually acquired skills from the experience. A negative tone question is not necessarily a negative thing for you. It's a way for the board members to assess whether or not you are a real person in the interview environment, because you try and tend to pretend or to put out a persona that a lot of the times you're not.
Can I just add something?
Yes,
I think that's really relevant. It could be difficult for us Finns, but also thinking in advance strengths and weaknesses, because I've experienced if somebody cannot answer any weakness or anything to be improved, that's also probably a negative sign.
Yes, it's seen in definitely seen in a negative way. I definitely, I recommend to the folks that I work with and board members never to really overemphasize negative questions and not really start with a negative question because it sets kind of a bad tone, but something to that effect, and I'll give you an example. It is important to measure where people are in their professional development. Marta, could you walk us through how we can prepare for these questions?
Sure, so as we were discussing before, when you take this and you read not only the tasks and responsibilities, which is what we have been doing before, to extract those competencies that we see we could get at the interview, we also need to look at the requirements, what is required, apart from the educational thing and the years of experience. What else is required? Because there we will also see competencies that we can extract. And then it is a matter of looking into our past experiences and extracting situations that are very relevant. I personally, every time something happens where I say, oh, this was a good example, or it was an example I need to learn from, I write it down. I have a notebook, and I just write them down. Because whenever I am going to go to an interview, the first thing I do is I look at this notebook and I see all these situations. And I can also use these situations for several competencies. You can use a big example where I have, for example, organized an assessment center in my private company. I used to work for an assessment center. Is a huge thing. It was a huge project. So it's not only communication, but it's also coordination and planning and many more things. No? So from a big example, you can extract several competencies you can think of and then rehearse. So this is about real-life examples that demonstrate these competencies, and then again structuring them in a way that you can reduce that explanation to maximum 6 minutes, but I would say even less, 3, 4, 5 minutes maximum, to allow for panel members to come with follow-up questions and walk them really clearly through the SMART structure. So that everybody, to the STAR structure, so that everybody knows in which part of the answer we are. Is it where the candidate did something, or is it where the result is? So really walk them through that. And I was going to say something. I told you I was going to mention in this slide to start. I forgot right now.
It'll come back to you.
It will come back. Action verbs are also very important. I have a list of verbs. Because you don't want to always use the same verb for everything. I coordinated. So you can use several that you can have in your mind, and you can then quick, so to say, whenever when you're explaining those situations.
Creating your application for the position and actually selecting the right verbs to determine and show what you've done is a good way to start the preparation. Especially if you find the same way to describe or similar way to describe as it is in the job description. So, speaking of job description, again, as mentioned before, it's very important that you look at the activities, the duties and responsibilities associated to the job, so that you can extricate those competencies. And most of the time you also have the competencies listed. In the case of secondary positions in field operations, you will not, because we use a different system called React. Could you tell us about React?
Well, first of all, is everybody familiar with the difference between international contractor and international seconded in the OSCE? Who is not familiar with it? Okay, then let me just very briefly explain. Seconded in the OSCE is not the same as seconded in another international organization, where you can be working for the UN, for a UN agency, for example, and then be seconded to another UN structure. The OSCE, the way we second, is participating states directly second, they nominate, they lend us their candidates to us for a certain period of time, and then probably then they go back. So this system was created a long time ago in the 90s to allow for civil servants to come for a very short period of time, 6 months, 1 year maximum, to the OSCE, bring what they had, contribute to the mandate, and then go back with all this baggage of international exposure back to their systems. And this is how the secondment system was created. And the way it was created in the 90s was following the needs that the OSCE had at that moment, with 12 fields of expertise and this React system, which contemplates, as I said, these 12 fields of expertise and the different requirements that are necessary for these fields of expertise and the different levels, according to the number of years that are required, the numbers of years of experience, from S1 to S4. This system is very old-fashioned. We are trying to modernize it and bring it to the modern times of the OSCE. But when you see a seconded position in the OSCE, you will see some patterns. You will see that the requirements at the beginning are very similar: excellent physical condition and so on and so forth.
Ability to drive manual transmission.
So don't listen to this.
Which is required in some locations, but not in all.
Don't pay attention to the part of the vacancy. We're trying to modernize this, which is not easy because it needs a permanent council decision. All ambassadors, all 57 deciding to discontinue or establish this system. So when you see one of these seconded positions, you will see these first. Where you need to really look is at the mission-specific requirements. That's what the mission is really asking for today, for that specific position at that specific level. And this is why, since these vacancy notices come from that system, they cannot incorporate new things like a competency model, for example. This is the reason why, but I mean, you have them anyway in our website. So.
And one more reason for you, if you find a seconded position that you're interested in, to actually look at the terms of reference, because it's not a job description. We have terms of reference based on React. Look at the duties and responsibilities associated to it, and extricate the competencies from it, and create your own questions. And we'll provide you some examples, like here. For example, communication is one competency that you see in any competency framework, okay? And the definition we have there: actively works to achieve clear and transparent communication with colleagues and the stakeholders of the organization. So right next to it, we do have some positive behavioral indicators. I'll just read out. Maintains open communication and freely shares information, seeks out and values the input of others, speaks and writes clearly using language that others can understand, demonstrates an ability to discuss differing points of view, maintains composure and effective communications in challenging situations. This is what we're looking for. Maybe not all of this, but indications that all of this is present in the way that you operate in the workplace. Your task is to think of examples that would lead us to infer or get examples of this directly. Does that make sense? The next one, analysis and decision making. You can find all of those in the OSCE Companion for Competencies, which can be found at jobs.osce.org. Could you read the field flexibility map so that we...
Yeah, activities are competency that the following: responds positively and effectively to changing circumstances. So we see the following behaviors: adapts activities and approaches to suit changing work circumstances, can change ideas or perceptions based on new information or contrary evidence provided by others, identifies benefits for the organization by questioning and improving routine activities, very needed in organizations like we will see, responds creatively to challenges, thinking on his or her feet in response to situations, reacts effectively and responsibly to difficult or challenging circumstances, and/or embraces new work methods and processes. And I say and/or because you don't have to show all of them. It's not a matter of showing all of them. And it's also a matter of showing, there are several levels of showing actually a competency. So these are just examples of how you can show it, and also things that you can think of when you are going to your past experience and thinking of examples. Maybe one of these points actually recalls a situation that you had in the past.
And again, we know very well that competency-based interviews tend to be skewed towards individuals who are more comfortable saying, I did this, I achieved that, I completed this. And in a lot of cultures within personalities, people may be more likely to say, I helped the team, I collaborated, I supported. We want to hear your impact. I know that many of you will hear this and may still be tempted to say, yeah, I helped the team do this. Be sure that you will hear from an experienced interviewer. So tell me more about your role. What exactly did you do? Our goal is not to put you in a corner. Our goal is to make you feel comfortable enough to give us information. It's collecting data. All we're doing is just collecting data about you. So one way to deal with that is actually focusing on your impact. So you always have to keep in mind, in this example, what was my impact? If I didn't do things myself, how did I contribute? How did I assist? How did I support? Of course, highlight the team, but always go back to how you contribute that as well. We understand it's not necessarily always easy. That's why we ask follow-up questions to get to the impact that you have in the work environment. Obviously, this ranges dramatically at times from whether you are in an assistant level position versus in a senior management position, but your ability to take initiative can be quite impactful, no matter what level you are. Okay?
Remember now what I was going to say about the other slide. So, when we're thinking about concrete situations, many times, and I have interviews behind me as a panel member, we ask the question and then I hear the following. Sure, that happens to me every day. It's all the time. For example, this morning, but yesterday as well, 2 years, a panel member stops this candidate and says, no. So we're looking for one concrete example. And again, the candidate, but it really happens every day. For example, yesterday, and this is much more often than you would think. So, this is absolutely nothing to me. It's not going to predict anything. I need a concrete behavior, a concrete situation, because based on this, I will know the level of the competency that you have been demonstrating. And it's very messy for a panel member who is listening to one candidate after the other, question after question, to hear somebody who is jumping from one position, from one situation to the other, and not giving a structured star. Is it possible to give a star structure if you jump from one situation to the other? So you can definitely say, this happens very frequently to me, but I'm going to give you one concrete example where something special happened. It was a special situation because of this, and then you start with your star. But don't say, oh yeah, it happens to me all the time, and then you go jumping and give 6 short examples, because that is not going to help, and it's very difficult to assess a competency that way. That's what I want to say.
A good way to be a game as well is not to try and gotcha at the interviewers by anticipating all questions. You don't necessarily need to, but you can create questions thinking, putting on the hat, if I were a hiring manager for this position, what kind of questions would I ask? Create these questions yourself. I guarantee you that if you create 100 questions, there might be 2 or 3 questions that they will ask you that you didn't think about. It's not that. There's nothing better than a job that you are qualified for. Right? Your role, again, as I said, is to reduce the noise and feel more comfortable with the competencies requested. Nothing better to tell a story than using action verbs. Okay? And none of us here, or most of us here, are non-native English speakers. So we are very familiar with the fact that English not being our first language, there are some limitations, or not, to how we express ourselves. Your goal as well is to understand and learn more about your job so that you can speak about it in an intelligent manner. It doesn't necessarily need to be in Shakespearean English, but it has to be very clear to show that you demonstrate the competencies. You've got a question?
Yes, is it possible to choose another official language of OSCE?
No, because the working language of the OSCE is English, and this is very typical of the United Nations organizations as well. In some UN organizations, French and English may be the working languages. At NATO, for example, where I've participated in a process, you do the interview in English, do a written exam and choose whether or not you want to do in French and or in English, and there's typically a question asked in the other language, to which I memorize how to say, I'm sorry, but my French is very bad.
Also, one thing about languages, now that you mentioned this, so the usual is English professional fluency. If you click English working knowledge, because your meat is a bit rusty and you're not going to even pass to the long list. So make sure that your English is professional fluency and that you click professional fluency. If Russian is required, is mandatory, we are going to ask a question in Russian for sure. Probably in the Son group, the pre-recorded, otherwise in the interview and or in the test. We will make you write in Russian. So, this is very important because some people are really surprised, but if we make it mandatory, well obviously we have to check that you speak Russian. Otherwise everything is in English. And the other thing I wanted to say about the action verbs, yes, I'm obviously, and I'm Spanish, so the beauty of my language is to decorate the one thing, decorate it with many words, and so talk a lot and at length. This is the beauty of my own native language and Portuguese too.
Yes.
Other languages, maybe if with one word you have said everything. Maybe it is your case. I don't speak any Finnish, so I don't know, but this is maybe the case. Action verbs in English say, summarize, I would have said in Spanish in 5 words. So it is important to memorize them and to be very familiar with them and to use several in order for you to start with this verb and then you do the click already with the panel members who are already understanding that you support it, that you coordinate it or whatever.
And a good tip is, again, repeat that again, always look at the official job description and look at the action verbs they're using to describe their tasks and responsibilities. This should be your right to use the same or find similar to those. And also think about, how do I want to convey or represent myself in this process? So I have some examples that you can find online as well. Like if you are an innovator, there are some verbs that everybody uses, like improved, streamlined, organized, in making your description of your job or in your application or talking about your work. Other verbs could be clarified, integrated, modified, remodeled, fabricated, regulated. If you go to communicator, for example, a lot of people write wrote, spoke, relayed. You can use composed, corresponded, formulated, discussed, informed, and this can be easily found online. And all of you received this presentation later. This is just to give you a flavor that the information is out there. It's just a matter of putting some work in finding that. These are examples as well. Like if you started something, you can say activated, adopted, implemented, launched. If you thought of something new, using conceived, improvised, shaped. If you provided something, installed, rendered, supplied, and things of that nature. We do have time for an exercise very soon. And I want to do an exercise on communication, something regarding conflict resolution. What I'd like you guys to do now is the following. If you have pen and paper, if you don't, there are lots of pens and pads, notepads stacked over there for us to do an exercise in 5 minutes. So get pen and paper now. I'll give you 30 seconds to pull it out, and then I'll explain. Okay, so we'll continue now. What we're going to do is we're going to walk through an interview situation and see not necessarily ideal, but formulaic answers. Okay, so they're kind of exaggerated so that you can get your bearings and see typically what could be considered a good answer to those questions. The question that I have for you first is the following. What is the toughest conflict you've helped settle? Why was this particularly tough? Okay, so what I'd like you to do is to think about, we're going to follow the entire strategy of SMART, thinking about what was this specific event or task, moving to what objectives did you see as the key issues to resolve, moving to what did you actually do, moving to what did you actually achieve, and finalizing what did you learn from the experience. So the first thing I want you to think about is, regarding this most difficult conflict that you've helped settle, I want you to jot down maybe one sentence or a few words to bring to mind about what was the specific event or task. Think about the situation. I'm going to give you 1.5 minutes to jot down your own answer. A disagreement, any disagreement between two people. Yeah. You have 30 seconds, just jot down what was the situation about the toughest conflict or disagreement that you helped settle or something of similar nature. All right, so, going on to situation, what was the specific event or task? So now I'll show you kind of a prototype, okay? First I'll give you about 15 seconds for you to read. They don't have Mark to read it because sometimes you can't focus if someone is reading. So I'll give you 15 seconds to read that.
So, situation. I was working on a project with two colleagues who just didn't get along. The situation got so bad that they weren't communicating and it was affecting the quality of work being produced. The project manager was avoiding addressing the issue as he said it wasn't his place to intervene. As I kept missing key performance indicators, the situation became increasingly untenable.
So this is a situation for this particular person, okay? Now, think about your own situation, the one that you jot down, and you've already worked on the S for yourselves. Now I want you to work on your situation and think about the mission. What objectives did you see as the key issues to resolve? Now I'm going to give the mission for this situation to help you think about your own mission. Does that make sense? Marta, could you read the mission for this person?
Sure. So the mission would be, if nothing were to happen, I knew that the project would fail. Even though I wasn't in charge, I decided to see if I could assist my colleagues' work through their differences.
All right, now I'll give you a minute and a half to write down your mission for the situation that you had. Again, if you're still thinking, we have 30 more seconds for you to write down your mission from the situation you jotted down about yourself regarding a conflict, the most difficult, toughest conflict you've helped settle. You've got 30 seconds. Okay, so now let's go to the next one, which is one of the most important pieces of this exercise. What did you actually do? Okay, so I'm going to read the action for this example so that you can get some inspiration or find ways to describe your own action. In this case, let me give you 15 seconds to read that, and then I'll read it out to you. All right, so Marta,
Let's
would
read
you
it,
read
yeah.
this for us?
Sure. So, my situation. The first thing that I did was to speak to each of my colleagues alone over coffee. I wanted to see if they would open up to me and reveal the cause of the tension. I found out that both felt that the other was not pulling their weight. Both resented having to pick up the extra work. After this, I reviewed the project management plan and noticed that some of our team's roles and responsibilities were not clearly defined. I created a revised plan and submitted to the program manager for consideration. Once the program manager had agreed to the changes, I asked him to call a clear the air meeting where new roles and responsibilities could be discussed.
Okay, so now, obviously I don't want you to write a paragraph, but I'd like you to think about 2 or 3 things that you did in your situation. And I'll give you 1 minute to write down 2 or 3 things that you did in that particular situation you described. Don't forget to focus on your role. What did you do? Seconds. Okay, so we've done situation. What is M in this model?
Mission.
Mission. What is A?
Action.
Action. What is R?
Results.
Results. So what did you actually achieve? What were the results? The results for this particular example was, I'll give you 10 to 15 seconds to read, then Martha's going to read it out loud. Could you read the example for us?
So the result would be, although the meeting was tense at first, once agreement had been reached on the defined roles and responsibilities, some of the tension seemed to go. The next day I invited the whole team for lunch and we slowly started to get along better as a unit. The pair who had not got along previously even managed to say a few words to one another. Over the next few weeks, the early phases of a new working relationship started to develop for the team. While it is still not as strong as it could be, they are communicating regularly, which is helping the team get back on track and meet their key performance indicators.
Exactly. Now I'll give you 1 more minute to think about 1 or 2 results of your situation. Give you 15 more seconds. More seconds. Okay? Now the last one is, what did you learn from the experience? So now let's look at what the person learned. This experience has taught me the importance of having clearly defined roles and responsibilities in a team's project plan. It has also helped me realize that good teamwork is the responsibility of every team member and not just of the project manager. What I'd like to do to finalize is 1 minute for you to write down what you learned from your experience, and then we're going to do a similar exercise in pairs. 1 minute for you to write down what you learned from your experience. Seconds for you to finalize a lesson learned in this experience. All right, so tell me one thing. How difficult was this from 0 to 10? Was it very, for some people it can be quite difficult, for some people it can come very easily. How difficult was this for you?
Easy.
Yeah? From 0 to 10, give me a number.
Easy being 0.
No, 10 being
easy. Okay, then 8.
Okay, anybody feels differently? It's okay. Yeah? Go ahead, tell me.
I felt difficult to put it in practice because I had the initial feeling I do this every day for work. Exactly. So put it in the pieces. So I think it took some time. So.
Anybody has other opinions or different opinions, the same opinion?
I'm not too proud of the example, but it could have been something more better.
Okay.
But it's just like a conflict between two people.
Mm-hmm.
But the system was quite easy. But it was nice to try it out first time.
And I love the fact that you said this, because sometimes you will be thrown questions that you wouldn't want to answer. Guess what? You gotta answer them anyway. So what I want you to do now is the following. In pairs, what I'd like you to do is to use your notes to actually tell your pair, your mate next to you, the answer to this question. So what I'll do is each person will have 5 minutes to tell his or her story to the colleague. Then we're going to flip. Does that make sense? So if you have your pair right next to you, decide now who is going to be first. Let's say the person to the left will be first. 5 minutes, go. I'm sorry if you haven't had time to wrap up this after that time, so we're going to debrief this after the fact. Now we're going to flip, okay? And now the other person is going to answer the question, what is the toughest conflict you've helped settle? Why was this particularly tough? And follow the structure that you created, and the other person will now have 5 minutes. Then we're going to debrief. You can start now.
How did you feel thinking of this example? It's a conflict, so it's one of those competency-based questions where you can feel, well, when I want to tell the other person, does this show that I see conflict, but there's no conflict? It was too much conflict. I got mixed up in a conflict I didn't want. So how did you feel doing this exercise and exploring this particular question? Very inconvenient. Inconvenient. Okay.
Inconvenient because?
Yeah.
Memories of talking about this uncomfortable incident. How about talking about that with someone that you may not know so well?
Okay. Yeah.
My first impression was that, of course, just thought came into my head. I don't really have a question. What do I have? I was like a little bit scared, like, do I have anything? And then I kept thinking about a few minutes, something started to come up, another examples, and I realized I had at least a couple of good examples.
Good.
I can talk about, but this, I think it was a nice exercise in that sense that if you do this thinking process before the interview, you already have your prepared.
Sure. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, anybody else?
On the right side or the back?
What about negative experiences? In that teachability, my conflict was that we had a big project and I needed to take a lot of responsibility. That wasn't really mine because others didn't and we would have lost a lot of money. And it boiled down to having to write an awful lot. I was working basically 24 hours sleeping, working for about 2 months. Which really was not what I would like to do. It really was not, it was physically, emotionally, in all ways, it was...
So what would you have done differently in that situation?
Well, in that situation, I don't think I could have, in that situation, done anything, but the lesson for myself is, of course, kind of planning and remembering that resource allocation is vitally important, but in that situation I couldn't have allocated resources better. But is that a lesson I would want to say there? Or should I just say that, make it a heroic experience of how I managed to create the report in 2 months and it received rave reviews and it was...
No, definitely the lesson learned is very important in that case.
Some things are out of our control.
Oh, yeah. Or if you're talking about planning, then, definitely you want to bring that as well. Or you can also say, if I'm ever confronted with the situation again and I see that I have to do it again, I would discuss with my supervisors first how we're going to do it, because what you're saying is not even healthy, So So definitely I would explain.
And there isn't a one-way answer, because you may get panel members who may consider you being heroic a little bit foolish. I'm not saying that's the case. Or may consider, you mean she cannot manage up? One thing that the first thing that came to my mind when you asked this question, when you told me that thing was like, what do you do to take care of yourself? If you're a psychologist, that's one of the questions that you get asked all the time. I'm not talking about you. But if you're a psychologist and you don't know how to take care of yourself, you should be treating patients. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what is the job that you're applying for? How do you want to represent yourself? In fact, what is the truth about this experience? Hang into the truth. Whether you're going to get the job or not, we don't know. But at least you know that you'll never be lying. And that's as best as you can do for a day.
And then Regarding what you mentioned that it was uncomfortable, this question comes very, very frequently. Keep that in mind. A conflict, something uncomfortable, and how you resolved it, that says a lot about your past experience and how you would react in adverse situations. So at the OSCE at least is a super frequent question. And another thing I wanted to say is the answers that you saw that I was reading out loud, it's not right or wrong. Okay, so do not take that as the best example and say, okay, I'm going to say something like this, because it's not right or wrong. It's just an answer that is competency-based. That's the important thing. It's not right or wrong. Plus, when you're looking at competencies, the level of competency of communication, for example, that you need to show at a P1 level is not the same as at a P5 or director level.
Hallelujah.
So if you are going to apply for a P5 position where 10 years of management progressively responsible experience are required, if you come with this example, it's not that it's wrong, but it's very weak, it's very poor. No, two were fighting, and then I went and I said, you need to come with something a bit more substantial, with long-term impact, as a manager of a big team or something like this, no? That's what I wanted to say about this example. And you wanted to mention something.
Yeah, it was surprising that both of these examples we were pointing out from our side, both came up while we were serving in OSCE.
While you were serving with OSCE?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
congratulations for that.
That's why this is the Organization for Cooperation.
One question I have is, how many people were able to complete the story in 5 minutes?
That's also
So that's part of the training as well. It's not rushing through. One thing that's important that I tell everyone, including people who work with us, in giving presentations is, if you start getting nervous, start speaking slowly. You look like you're methodical and careful. Nobody's going to tell you diamonds. Okay?
Well.
We only have 15 minutes left. We have a quick video to show you before we wrap up about another example that's very short. It's like 3 minutes and 45 seconds. And it's a question in a job interview about how did you handle a difficult situation.
Employers like to ask the question, tell me about a difficult situation, conflict, or challenge you faced in the workplace. You will most likely be asked this question in one form or another. The employer is checking your critical thinking skills by asking you to relate to a specific instance where you, A, took charge in handling a challenging situation or conflict, and B, collaborated with your coworkers as a team in order to do so. The employer is checking your critical thinking skills, approach to the problem, and the level of responsibility you take in challenging situations. So it is important that you think of good examples that involve you handling and resolving a problem.
Tell me about a time you faced a challenging situation at work.
One time a customer was yelling at me. I don't write the rules, so I let her know that and went and got my manager.
It is important to make sure that you use an example that demonstrates your ability to handle a tough situation. It does not make sense to use an example that involves elevating the situation to a superior and not being the one responsible for the resolution. This is also a good chance to show your ability to work as part of a team. Being able to analyze a problem, utilizing the advice and suggestions of others demonstrates good critical thinking skills and shows you are a team player. In order to tell an effective story and frame your example, use the PAR model. P stands for problem. What was the problem or challenge you were facing? A is for action. How did you and your coworkers analyze the problem, and what actions did you take in order to solve it? R is for result. What is the positive outcome as a result of your actions? Ending the story strong is necessary. You want to show that you learned from the experience and created a positive situation or environment for all parties involved. Let's look at a good example of a candidate who has structured her answer well. Here, we have a project manager working with 2 of her colleagues to meet a deadline. Her colleagues were not able to agree with each other on the details of the project.
One time, while working as a project manager at a builder's construction company, I was working with 2 of my colleagues to meet a deadline on a proposal we were drafting. They could not agree with each other on how to approach the proposal and the deadline was near. It was obvious we needed to work better as a team, so I invited them both to lunch where we were able to openly discuss the details of the project, allowing both of them to hear the full scope of each other's plans. Having lunch together gave them the opportunity to see that they both had similar visions of the big picture, but disagreed about smaller, less important details. After hearing both of their plans, we made a single list using the best and most efficient ideas that we all agreed on. In the end, we ended up drafting one solid proposal that was under budget, making our client very happy. It turned out that afterward, the two worked together even more, producing some of the best projects we had in my time at the company. I feel that the experience helped me improve my ability to collaborate and work as an integral part of a team, while growing in my leadership skills as well.
Remember, when answering the question pertaining to a time you were faced with a challenging or difficult situation in the workplace, use examples that demonstrate how you stepped up and took a leadership position by collaborating with your coworkers. Remain upbeat and positive when giving your answer, and use the PAR system to frame the story.
Alright, so this is just an overall, it looks very cookie cutter, very clean. Life is not cookie cutter, life is not clean like that. Your job is to make sure that you don't sound cookie cutter, but you reduce the noise. And one way to reduce the noise is actually focusing on behavior or non-verbal behavior. And if I understood Finnish well, I would know what this was. But there you go.
So obviously you know all these things, but it's important to repeat them, to mention them. The non-verbal behavior says a lot more than what we're actually saying. So the personal presentation is, of course, very important. Of course, you can come without a tie or whatever. It's up to you how you come to an interview, or even if you're doing the interview via teleconference. But obviously, if you're dressed appropriately, it will make it has just a neater effect, on the people that are looking at you, who actually say, okay, this person, bothered to come well dressed and so on. Also the positioning, so your voice, the tone of your voice changes, and it gets, less, it becomes more gray and less interesting if you're like this, than if you're actually, letting on the air breathe, letting the air expand your lungs, and actually your voice becomes much more powerful. So be mindful of this. Also the positioning of the panel members, and that is something that is important for you to know, that while you are explaining something, they are taking notes. So they will try to have eye contact whenever possible, but do not be disturbed by the fact that they need to take note, because they are writing their star themselves as well, while you're explaining to them. So important to have eye contact with every single panel member. There are many people that just look at the hiring manager, or because they know who it is, because we introduce ourselves, or only the person that asked the question. It's important to look at everybody. And if they don't establish this eye contact, it's because they're taking notes. So just be mindful of that. And the facial expression. So this lady, for example, is looking very serious. So just you don't have to laugh or crack jokes, but obviously, a smile will also, it will reciprocate, the voice we discussed as well, and the posture, the positioning obviously is, if you're sitting like this, or you're not actually having a very communicative, so to say, posture, it really has an effect on how people are looking at you. And you have 4 or 5 people looking at you during that hour.
And just to keep, there are some more things in here that we're going to distribute the presentation. The United Nations is a great course on CBIs. You can actually, when you receive this slide, you're going to see that. It's, I think, a whole hour. It's an e-learning course. It's quite good. And you can also find this at the ISC Professional Skills page. I also will provide you with a few resources so that you can take a look about preparing for interviews. And I definitely recommend you subscribe to our newsletter. Little OSCE is the only international organization creating a monthly recruitment newsletter for potential applicants like you. And we are investing a lot of time and resources in that. This month, the topic is preparing for competency-based interviews. Coincidentally, for you to find the newsletter, what you have to do is go to bit.ly/OSCE jobs. Then you're going to be asked to enter your email. Then you subscribe. When you subscribe, you're going to receive an email from us with a newsletter every month, including the recordings of all of the previous webinars. And we have one that's called Understanding the Seconding Process at the OSCE, which can be quite valuable to you. Another one called Preparing for Video Pre-Screening Interviews. Another one called Monitoring Officer Opportunities at the OSCE. Another one called Preparing a Job Application for the OSCE, which is also valid for other international organizations, just don't tell too many people. And we're going to be doing more in the upcoming months, okay? Now that we have 5 minutes, we can see if you have any questions. You're tired, huh?
I have a last tip.
Yeah.
Another thing unrelated to the newsletter that is of course very important, you can learn a lot, which was the last slide, but it just came to my mind, and I wouldn't like to let this moment pass without telling you, is that we also hear very often candidates who come with examples of situations that are impressive, amazing, something huge happened, and they explain the whole thing, and then when the interviewer asks, so what was your role? The role is minimal. So there is the big example, the huge situation, the marvelous situation and example of it, but your role was just coordinating a small part of it. Then you're actually making yourself very, very small in that situation. It is better to be the big fish and the, how do you say that? The
small pond or
something like that. So do come with situations that maybe are less impressive, but where your role is actually much more relevant. So if you can choose, do choose the ones where your actions had a big impact, because we do see this very often. That's one tip I wanted to give you. And now, any questions? Anything to comment? Anything you would like to add? Anything we forgot that you would like us to mention? Yes?
Just about the written exam.
Yes.
Is it on a computer or do you have to use pen and paper?
No, it's in writing. So if you do it online, you will get the instructions first on when you can do the test. You will be given some time to choose, or you will be given a specific time. That will depend on the process that we're doing. And usually then we also tell you, okay, this is going to take 1 hour, whatever. Then the day that you're going to receive the test, you usually receive it 1-2 minutes before the time we have set, so that you can actually receive it, see that everything is there, all the attachments, and then respond to the person that has sent it, yes, I acknowledge, received, and then you can start your test. And it usually takes 1 hour. It can also take 2. Usually our tests are 1 hour. You type everything in and you send it back. Important to read the instructions. Very, very important, because sometimes internet is allowed, sometimes it's not allowed. Important to make it anonymous, so we are not supposed to know that it is you writing that test. So do not put your name, do not put anything that can actually lead a panel member to think that's you.
We don't want to know your name, we don't want to know your gender, we don't want to know your nationality.
Anything, nothing.
All
anonymous. If it is done in Vienna, then it's a very stressful day. I know, but usually we take you to the interview, and right after that you have time obviously to go to the restroom, have a coffee, a glass of water, whatever, but right after that you go into the test room and you take your test, and it is also, you need to type, so you don't need to write it down.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Is it usually one or more questions in these written tests?
It's usually 2 to 3 questions. It is usually 2 questions, so that you can allot, so to say, 30 minutes per question. It can also be 3, it can also be 1, but the usual thing is 2 questions. And as we mentioned before, it is very technical. There is where we're going to ask you, for example, if you're applying to a position as policy support officer in the Central Asian desk, we will probably ask you, what are the challenges, for example, what are the challenges that you see OSCE with whatever, its mandate in the OSCE mission in Tajikistan, for example, something like this. I'm just making it up, you know?
But don't hate me, but I'm also trying to think about introducing some sort of case study, especially for CFAs, which would require...
Chief Fund Administration.
Yeah, Chief Fund Administration, which is a very important person running the office. And that would require quick thinking, Excel spreadsheets, and questions. So we may say it's typically 2 or 3 questions, but things could change. You may be asked more questions that are shorter, things of that nature. I think you've got another question.
Yeah. Do you have a minimum, let's say you have 2 questions and then you manage to make a very good answer for the first one, but then your time runs out and the second one comes out not very good. So do you have a minimum length or minimum something for the answers?
There is a marking guide that is distributed to all reviewers, made by the hiring manager, that determines what does an answer need to have to receive the maximum number of points. So there's a structure behind that.
Plus, we also mentioned how many points are per question.
Yeah. In what percentage of the full assessment, the written assessment is as compared to the interview.
Yeah, so if you say, I'm much stronger in this question and this question is worth whatever, 70 points, and the other one 30, you know that you can, you can spend more time in this one because it's going to be more important, so more relevant, so to say, than the other. Ideally, respond to all the questions. It's not a good thing to not respond to one of the questions. And then, apart from the guideline that the hiring department gives panel members so that we all look at the same thing while we are scoring the test, which is more the technical part. The other side is we will look at how the person is expressing him or herself, the rationale behind what the person is saying. Many times, the written test, there's no right or wrong question, there's just whatever you want to argue, but argue it well, in a structured way. First saying what you're going to say, then saying it, and then saying what you have said. So this is also very important. And for written tests, important also to, if you're going to quote something, to make sure that you're actually quoting and have it in writing, mention it in the written test so that panel members don't think, this person is first plagiarizing. So if you're going to quote, you quote, but you mention the quote. More or less, this is.
Other questions? Well, we just want to say that on behalf of recruitment unit and talent management, we are very thankful about the support of the Finnish government to secondment and TOSC. And it's been delightful to be back in Helsinki, and I'll be back as a tourist. And this is actually the first time that Mark and I did this presentation together, so forgive any issues that we may have had, but you've been a delightful audience, so thank you for that.
Thank you.